Chapter 1. Gift to the Quirkless. Chapter text. Izuku, wake up. We're here. The gentle words of his mother, as well as the light shaking of his shoulder, roused the young boy from his sleep. A sleep which grew less and less pleasant as the days went by, each bone-chilling event playing on loop in his mind every time he closed his eyes. It always started out the same, seeing the doctor slouching in the chair before him as he told the 4-year-old boy that he would never get a quirk. Then it would move to him sitting there at preschool, with all of the other students around him keeping their distance as if just being near him would take away their quirks. But he could still hear their words. Things like quirkless and freak were whispered by not only the other children, but the adults as well. He would sit there for what seemed like hours as their words would just echo on and on, their bodies becoming nothing more than silhouettes with their eyes glowing white. Then, at the end, he was back in that playground trying to stand up for another student only to get beaten up and left on the ground. And then, after that, if he hadn't woken up, the dream would simply repeat. It was as if his mind wanted to rub his face in his own shame. The shame of being born quirkless, of being a nothing. Of course, if he did wake up, it would be reality that would be rubbing his face in his own uselessness. But this time, when he opened his eyes, he found that he was no longer in his room. No, he was in the back of a van strapped into a child's safety seat. Slowly he looked around, spotting his mother struggling to talk to a man in a language he didn't know, while the man, who sat up front, had the same annoyed smile on his face that the people who ran the preschool often wore when they had to deal with him. After a few minutes, Izuku was freed from the chair and was helped out of the van. Once outside, the 4-year-old winced. It had surprised him since, back home, it hadn't been this hot outside and the van had been fairly cool. But now that he was outside, the sun's light somehow seemed brighter than normal, while making his skin feel like it was burning slightly. He almost wanted to head back into the van, but the slamming of the door behind him quickly dashed that idea. As his eyes began to adjust, Izuku found himself on the sidewalk staring up at a large yard. The grass almost seemed to glisten, and the boy could smell the scent of water in the air, telling him that sprinklers had been on not too long ago. The yard was large too, Izuku thinking how easily he could run around it and play all sorts of games with his friends. Well, if he still had any, that was. As for the house, it was something that Izuku wasn't used to seeing. It was a long house whose walls looked like they were made of a yellow stone and several brick archways on the porch. And on top of the archway where the front door was located, the green-haired boy could see that someone had mounted a pair of horns there. A moment later, Izuku felt his mother taking hold of his hand. He looked up to her, finding that she looked just as nervous as he was, perhaps more. But then he watched as she took a deep breath before looking down at him, a smile appearing on her face. Without a word, Inko led her son towards the front doors of the house where, upon reaching it, she knocked, all the while never letting go of Izuku's tiny hand. When the door opened, all of Izuku's worries and nightmares seemed to leave him as his eyes began to sparkle at the sight before him. Standing at his eye level was a small girl he assumed was his own age, hiding behind the backwardly bent legs of the woman standing between them. Rather than looking up at said woman, Izuku took in the sight of the young girl's twin horns which sprouted out of her blonde hair, which was tied in short pigtails. The boy also thought she looked very kind when he compared to those from his class, especially with those large blue eyes which matched the short dress she was wearing. Izuku also noticed that her legs also seemed to bend backwards as well, and, instead of feet, she had hooves. "Oh, you must be Hisashi's wife," came a voice from above, causing Izuku to jump a little. He had been so caught up with the girl that he had failed to look up at all. Slowly he looked up, his eyes staring at the hooves that the older woman had before trailing up her blue jeans and white top. When he got to her face, he saw that the older woman also had blonde hair, though it was much longer, done in heavy braids and resting on her shoulder. Her eyes were blue, but a darker shade while not being as big. But as Izuku took in the girl's appearance, he couldn't help but notice that this woman had a single horn sticking out of her forehead. Izuku's eyes widened as he realized he had seen this large, spiral-shaped horn before thanks to a video link his father had sent him of a hero he claimed to know. Izuku's excitement almost exploded within his body as he realized he was meeting the American pro hero, Unicorn. He couldn't believe it. Not even his friend Kakin had met a real live pro-hero face-to-face like this before. And she was a pretty cool one as well from what he had seen. Her quirk, horn drill, basically meant her horn could spin like a drill powerful enough to go right through the door of a bank vault. Not only that, it could be launched like a missile. Izuku's eyes widened as he wanted to ask her so many questions about her quirk. How tough was her horn? Could it drill through anything? After launching it, did she have to retrieve her horn, or did she have to wait and grow a new one? Could she control her horn as it flew through the air? "I'm Carol Tsunatori," said Unicorn, her words bringing Izuku back into the moment as he realized something else. She was speaking Japanese. It was slower than normal and a few of the words sounded off, but he could understand what she was saying. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you. Your husband just loves bragging about the two of you." "Thank you," said Inko, her grip on Izuku's hand relaxing slightly. The younger Midoriya then looked up to his mother to see that she seemed calmer, more like her normal self. "Hisashi has talked about you as well. I'm Inko, and this is my son Izuku. Thank you for inviting us." When she finished saying this, Inko bowed her head slightly, with Izuku following suit. Unicorn, however, just waved it off as she stepped aside. "Oh, it's no trouble at all," she said as she gestured for them to enter. "That cheap apartment of Hisashi's is just no good for you to stay in. We've been telling him for years he should at least try to find something better, but you know how stubborn that man can be." Izuku blinked as he heard his mother giggle slightly as the door closed behind them. The first time he had heard her do that since the trip to the quirk doctor. "I think being stubborn is just hardwired into that man." She then looked down at Izuku. "But it's always been his most endearing trait. It's how he was able to get Izuku into this experiment on such short notice." Izuku felt lost as the two adults continued to talk for a moment, as most of the words they used just went over his head. And when he glanced at the girl still hiding behind her mother, he could tell that she was just as lost as he was. Still, he did his best to smile at her, and, much to his own joy, she smiled warmly back at him. She then said something, using words he didn't know, but he didn't mind. Izuku had been told that he would be staying here with them for a week, maybe two, so maybe he could learn what they meant in the meantime. And she seemed very nice, so perhaps he could make a new friend who wouldn't pick on him, because he was quirkless. HR. Hisashi fidgeted, his hands running over the other in what felt like an endless loop as he stared out a window overlooking a separate room. He had felt so sure about this, moving heaven and earth so that his son could be part of his company's biggest project to date. That assurance had only increased yesterday when he had gone to the household of the Tsunatoris a few hours after his family had arrived in the UA, just barely making it in time for dinner. When he had first seen Izuku walking to the table with his friend's daughter, Pony, his son's eyes seemed to lack the spark they held in many of the pictures Inko had sent him over the years. But that sparkle of joy seemed to return tenfold when Hisashi told him that, if everything went according to plan, he would have a quirk of his very own. Both the light in his son's eyes and the barbecue-covered smile adoring his son's face was enough for the man to know that he had made the right choice. But now, seeing it in action, he was beginning to have second thoughts. Then again, how could he not when the sight before him looked like something straight out of a horror movie? The room was filled with a 10 by 10 grid of child-sized rectangular tanks, each one of them full of a green liquid, as well as a child in each one. All of these children had their eyes closed, breathing masks strapped to their mouths, while several tubes were connected to their arms and legs as they pumped various colored liquids into the systems of each of the floating children. And one of those children was his son, Izuku. More than once, Hisashi had looked down at his son who floated there with the rest, while various technicians and doctors moved between the spacious rows, all of them carrying tablets of some kind as they checked on either the equipment or the status of the volunteers. Honestly, you would have to be pretty messed up in Hisashi's opinion not to be freaked out by seeing all this. He was just glad Inko wasn't here to see this herself. Still, this was all for Izuku's sake, all thanks to the dream project of his company and the United States government. Since the beginning of the Hero Society, this country had lost a good number of heroes. To be honest, that was something that all nations shared. But, with the crime rate in the United States being one of the highest in the world, so too was the death rate of those heroes. And, by extension, their quirks also died along with them, as so many were unable to pass on their quirks to their offspring before their untimely demise. To combat this issue, the U.S. government contracted with several companies in the hopes of either helping to produce more powerful quirks or finding a way to resurrect the quirks. Thus, Project Quirk Rebirth, a horrible name in his opinion, began. Hisashi had a good understanding of Project Quirk Rebirth. For decades, his company had been studying the genetics of quirks with the assistance of samples that the U.S. government had provided them with. Once they understood what they were working with, the issue became trying to find a way to graft the quirks onto another. Currently, Hayashi was looking at their most recent attempt. It had been decided that after the company's last failed attempts that younger bodies that were still developing might be better suited. As such, all of the children below were between the ages of 4 and 6, as it was believed that that would be the ideal age group, as it was then that children started to develop their quirks. Everything that these children were now going through was designed so that they would not only gain access to these quirks, but also altering their bodies so that they would be able to handle them as well. Hisashi's gaze narrowed slightly as he saw a few doctors beginning to merge to where Izuku was. By the time there were 10 of them, all huddled around and exchanging data with each other, that narrowed gaze turned into panic for his son. Was there something wrong? Unlike all the other children, who came from powerful hero families who hoped that this process would either give them 2 quirks or combine the quirks into something more powerful, Izuku was the only quirkless child down there. Was his body just not strong enough to handle the process? "Mr. Midoriya," came a voice off to the side. Hisashi looked over, seeing a doctor running towards him with a tablet held firmly in his hands. At first, the father's heart sank as he began to fear the worst. Yet, when he saw the doctor's smile, that worry was set into a limbo of confusion. "Why, yes," was all the father could say, speaking in English, as the doctor skidded to a halt. "We have wonderful news. The procedure with your son was a complete success," exclaimed the doctor, eyes brimming with pride and accomplishment. "We're already starting to see quirk levels within him rising, and that his body is handling the changes without a hitch." "You mean, my son isn't quirkless anymore?" breathed Hisashi, his lips beginning to form a smile as tears threatened to appear. Could it be true? Would his son be able to have a normal life like every other child out there, not being teased or made to feel like a lesser human being due to his lack of a quirk? "That's right," beamed the doctor. "Now, we're going to need to watch over him for the next week while he's in the country to see if this holds up. And he's going to need to get a yearly evaluation for the next several years to see if there are any long-term side effects. But if all goes well, he will be able to live a long and healthy life like any other dash." The doctor's words were cut off by a sound that chilled both men's hearts on the spot. Red lights flashed as a buzzer sounded over and over, causing the doctor to run off without another word. At the same time, Hisashi looked back towards the window to see what was happening, hoping beyond hope that his boy was all right. And he thanked every deity that had ever existed when he saw that his son's condition looked unchanged. If only the same thing could be said about all the others. Nearly all of them were thrashing in their tanks as the doctors rushed over to see them. Many of their quirks were going off, endangering those around them in numerous ways that the nightmarish stillness that was the constant of the room prior became more violent in nature. Fire erupted from one of the tanks while another child became disfigured, his body twisting around itself as skin and bone broke. Another child's body looked like it had become diamond before sinking to the bottom of the tank, while another just exploded, sending body parts all over the place. Chaos reigned supreme, with the man unable to take off the events happening before him until it was all over and his son was the last child left alive. The rest of the week had been a blur for the young Izuku Midoriya. He couldn't remember much about the time when the doctors had put him to sleep, or anything for that matter, until he woke up the next day in the Tsunatori household. But since that morning, he was taken to a hospital every morning and would not be allowed to leave until well into the night. Each day, they ran test after test as they did things like taking his blood or putting him into very large machines that made noises that sounded scary to the child. Throughout all of this, his mother had been by his side looking like she was about ready to cry at any given moment. What had happened to make her so upset? All she would ever say was that he was too young to understand. Not even his father, who was also there and did most of the talking to the doctors, would tell him. What Izuku did know was that he now, finally, had a quirk of his own, said Quirk had shown itself in the doctor's office the day after they had put him to sleep. He could still recall how frightened he had been when it had appeared, before excitement overtook him. Sure, his quirk wasn't lifting things with his mind like what his mother could do or breathing fire like his dad. Actually, what he had wasn't all that flashy right now like many of the other quirks he knew about. But it didn't matter because now he had a quirk, one that he hoped would make him a hero like All Might, someone who could save the day with a smile on his face. This was practically confirmed by the doctors who explained to him about his quirk. They had, with help from his mother, explained to the boy about who the quirk had originally belonged to, how it worked, and how the fallen hero had used it to save people while fighting villains. And what they told the boy blew his mind apart. The sheer number of ways the original hero who had this quirk used it, the power behind it, tickled the boy's imagination. Yet, at the same time, he was a bit scared. His quirk was powerful and, well, could hurt someone very easily if he wasn't careful, something the doctors stressed more than once. But while getting his quirk should have been the happiest moment of his life, something else happened that he treasured just as much. That something just so happened to be his growing friendship with the girl named Pony Tsunatori. Simply put, it was nice to have a real friend again. One who didn't fire small explosions in your face or scream at the top of his lungs when angered. From the time he got back to the house till when he finally fell asleep, he and the blonde girl would play. And despite them not knowing the other's language, that never proved to be a real issue. Instead, they used simple gestures to say things they wanted to do. It was just a simple joy in life that Izuku had missed. One that he now had to leave behind now that the week was over. So here he was, standing in the doorway hugging Pony, who hugged him right back. As they did this, the dads present were helping to load up the van that would take them to the airport while the moms just spoke their own goodbyes while commenting on how adorable the pair looked. While it was still hot outside, Izuku just stood there with his arms wrapped around the girl and savored the feeling of her doing the same. A part of him wished he knew the words in her own language to tell her just how much he would miss her, how he hoped that they would remain friends even when they were far apart. But something inside of him told the boy that she understood, and that same something told him that she probably felt the same. As he was gently pulled away from the girl, Izuku made himself a promise. He had been told by his father, who was coming back with them to Japan, that they would be returning every year for a special checkup. With that knowledge, Izuku vowed to himself that he would learn enough English so that next time he could say goodbye to her properly, as well as telling her he'd see her again. Chapter 2. Times Change. Summary. Izuku's new life before UA. Chapter text. The morning is here. The morning is here. The morning is dash. The alarm caused by the All Might alarm clock situated on the nightstand next to Izuku's bed was swiftly silenced as its owner's hand flew over and behind it to press the off button, all while never once opening his eyes. It was only after several seconds of pure silence that a pair of green eyes opened to greet the light orange glow of the morning sun that was just now beginning to fill his room. With a small yawn, Izuku pushed the All Might covers off of his body before getting up. A tiny shiver ran through the boy's body as his feet made contact with the hardwood floor of his bedroom, a stark contrast to the warmth his bed had provided as he wiped away the sleep from his eyes. Soon Izuku stood straight up, beginning his morning ritual of stretching until he heard both his back and neck make a cracking noise. A soft, pleasurable noise escaped him as Izuku felt a nice tingle running throughout his body caused by this action. Now fully awake, Izuku walked across the room towards his closet on the opposite side of the room. As he did so, his eyes shot over to his deck hutch, which was flanked on either side by his rarest All Might posters. Overall, it was a fairly standard desk, with the upper area being used as a bookshelf holding his various study aids for school, as well as a number of his hero notebooks. Below that, sitting in the middle of the desk, was a desktop computer with a camera attached right above the screen. Izuku looked at both of them carefully before relaxing that he hadn't left them on. Again, the last thing he wanted was for his foreign friend to get another eye full of himself getting changed. As Izuku began to undress, his attention was constantly returning towards the desk, or, rather, the bulletin board behind the computer. Hanging from it were some of his favorite pictures he had collected over the last 10 or so years, each one framed at different spots where they would never be obscured. The one that started this trend was positioned at the top corner. It was a simple picture, showing an almost 5-year-old Midoriya standing between his parents, all of them smiling as they stood in front of their new house. Looking at it, Izuku recalled how his parents had decided that the apartment had been too small, as well as just wanting a fresh start now that they were all together. Thus, they had bought a large, 2-story house in a more rural area thanks in part to a non-disclosure settlement. Though, if he recalled correctly, it might have also had something to do with making sure to get Izuku away from a certain bully who lived nearby. Hanging next to that one was another picture, this one showing a young Izuku standing rigidly and looking scared out of his mind while wearing a white GI. Standing in the picture next to him, wearing a matching GI, was a man with an almost square-like head with short salt and peppered hair along with a matching thin mustache. This man, who preferred to go by his former hero named Secret Slash, stared forward with his small, narrowed eyes while his entire being oozed intimidation. The rest of the pictures, save for one, had been taken overseas during Izuku's trips to the Tsunotori household. A soft chuckle escaped Izuku as he saw one of the pictures of his first return to that house. The younger Izuku looking scared out of his mind, while looking like he was talking to Pony, who looked confused by what he was saying. He recalled that he had been trying to talk to her, using the lessons he had learned over the past year, and made a mess of himself. He had mispronounced several of the words, using them in the wrong order, and said a word or two that he thought sounded right, but clearly wasn't. Thankfully, Mrs. Tsunotori had been the one taking the picture and was able to clear up any misunderstanding. Besides, Pony hadn't been any better. Following that picture, many of the rest were fairly innocent. Just images of them playing together, returning from the All Might movie, going to the Texas Hero Hall of Fame, and so on. But some of the more recent images just reminded Izuku of how much the two had grown up. In particular, one picture of them taken last year when they had visited a water park. The two of them stood there, side by side with the sparkling pool in the backdrop. Izuku, wearing lime green trunks, was grinning as his matted hair clung to his head, while the moisture of the pool water glistened off his well-defined chest and abs. As for Pony, dressed in a blue bikini, she was all smiles as well as her own long blonde hair was matted against her, as well with water running down her horns and long legs. Izuku had wrapped an arm around her bare waist, bringing the two close enough for their bodies to be pressed against each other. The girl who had taken it had laughed afterwards, telling Pony she should show this to the guys who kept asking her out as proof that she already had a stud of a boyfriend. Izuku blushed at the memory as he tore his gaze away to look at the most recent photo. This one had been taken a few weeks when Pony had come to Japan in order to take the entrance exam at UA. Naturally, she had stayed at the Midoriya household during her week-long stay. In particular, the room right next to Izuku's. The picture showed the girl standing there in the doorway, waving as she wore an over-the-shoulder red, white, and blue crop top that showed off her stomach as well as long jeans. It wasn't as revealing as the previous picture, but it held memories of the time she had stayed here in Japan. Once Izuku was fully dressed in his jogging suit, he moved over to his deck to start what had been his morning ritual for the last 8 years. He sat down in front of his PC before activating it, the device quickly lighting up. Once it was on, he clicked the appropriate windows to bring him into his morning video call, seeing that Pony was there waiting for him. "Morning, Izuku," said the horned girl, her voice dripping with happiness as she spoke Japanese. Today she was wearing another crop top, the thin straps draping her bare shoulders while a tie-dye pattern covered her chest. From the way she was sitting, Izuku could just make out a little bit of her stomach. But what caught his attention was her eyes, which seemed to sparkle with an extra dose of happiness, and the way she moved her arms about told him she was fighting tooth and nail not to start spinning in her seat. "Good morning, Pony," said Izuku, though he knew that it was only morning for him. "I take it you got the results." "Yes," she cried, no longer able to contain herself as both arms shot into the air. She then reached out of the side of the camera to pull out a disc similar to the one Izuku had gotten in the mail. "I got in 42 villain points and 12 rescue points. And that wasn't even the best part. All Might. All Might himself told me my score and welcomed me into the school. I can't believe it. I'm going to be living in Japan." "I never doubted you," said Izuku honestly as he smiled at her before pausing to scratch his cheek. "Though, I wish I could have said the same thing about myself." All of Pony's cheerfulness vanished instantly as her hands went to her sides, her cheeks puffing slightly as a cute frown appeared on her face. Don't give me that. I heard all about what happened in your group. You took down 3 3 points in a single attack like they were made of paper. At that, Izuku gave off a sheepish laugh. Yeah, well, the only reason I was able to do that was because they were standing in a straight line, he admitted. He then let out a sigh. Sure, I could destroy them no problem, but I was just worried that I wouldn't get enough points in time. My quirk really doesn't do anything for my speed, and finding ones that no one else had became a bit of a problem near the end. I guess that makes sense, admitted Pony with a sigh, her head hanging slightly. But when she looked up, Pony made a move with her arms that made it look like she was about to slam them on her own desk, while giving Izuku a fiery look. But come on. You destroyed that giant zero-pointer all by yourself with that overpowered special move of yours. That alone should have earned you a spot in the hero course. I mean, it's a giant robot. How could any school see you destroying that thing in less than 4 seconds and say nope, not good enough? To be honest, I wasn't thinking about the exam when I destroyed it, said Izuku. I was more worried that it might hurt someone. Turns out I was right. If I had been a few seconds slower, that robot would have walked through a building where several students were in. As Izuku spoke, he fought back a shudder while his hands tightly gripped the armrests of his seat as he recalled how he had found this out. All Might, when presenting his scores, had decided to show him video footage of the exam when explaining how he had achieved his rescue point. The scene that Izuku witnessed was of at least a dozen examinees who had become trapped on the first floor of one of the mock office buildings. How they had gotten there wasn't shown, but the situation was clear. The stairway had been destroyed somehow, while parts of the ceiling had caved in. What made the image truly haunting was the looks on their faces, as each step the zero-pointer took seemed to shake the building. All 12 examinees worked as hard as they could, the exam all but forgotten about as they dug through the debris with clear fear and panic on their face. He recalled how one student even broke down, sobbing while slamming his fists into the ground. When it was over, the image of All Might had turned to look at Izuku to explain why he was showing him this. He had wanted to show him the panic people in danger face and, via his actions, had saved them. Had this been a real disaster and he had been a true pro hero, those people would have been able to continue with their lives thanks to his efforts. How he should hold this image in his heart as he moved forward into the future. And finally, how All Might said he looked forward to helping shape the future of a true hero. Well, I guess it didn't matter, said Pony, a small smile appearing on her face. We both got in. At that, Izuku nodded. His score had been 76 points on the practical exam, 34 villain points with the remaining 42 being rescue. When he had gotten his score, Izuku had wondered how they had determined this since the max number of rescue points was 60. The best he could come up with was that he hadn't known for sure if anyone had been in those buildings. But, as Pony said, it didn't matter. He was in. He was going to UA, his dream school ever since he had heard about its existence. The best hero school in the country, maybe even the world. And the icing on the cake was that he was going to be living there with Pony. While UA wasn't purely a boarding school, it did have a single building to house students that either wanted to live on campus or lived too far away. Since Pony was traveling from America, it was pretty much a no-brainer that she had to stay there. As for Izuku, well, just getting to UA was a half-a-day trip by train. On a good day, meaning if he wanted to go to UA, he would either have to stay in the dorm or have his parents help him get an apartment. And while he liked the idea of having a bit more independence, Izuku much preferred the idea of being in the same building as Pony. As Izuku was about to ask when Pony would be moving into the dorm, something primal within him began to stir while a fantasy began to play within his mind. Izuku suddenly found himself back in his bed with Pony standing in the doorway wearing nothing other than the blue bikini, as well as a smoldering smile that made the primal thing within him purr. Without a word, she made her way to the bed without ever breaking her gaze from Izuku's. The teen trembled, not out of fear, but of something else, as she was soon standing next to him. The Pony in his fantasy then leaned over, placing herself on the mattress next to him. The primal force purred even louder as Izuku could once again feel her skin pressing against his own as he found himself not in either his jogging suit or his swimming trunk, but his boxers. The feeling of her body pressed against his own, his hands running along her warm and soft skin while he breathed in her scent. He could recall it all, from every time they had touched, only now it was 1,000 times better. The room around them slightly changed, and something told him that this was now his dorm room, and that they were the only ones on this floor, meaning they could. Izuku snapped out of the fantasy, causing the primal force within to let out a growl as it retreated within him. Silently, he cursed himself for getting lost in another fantasy, ones that had become more common as of late, especially after Pony had stayed at his home. And given the imagery, the frequency, and the one person who was in all of them, Izuku had a pretty good idea what his mind was telling him. That he liked Pony, more than a friend that he had known since the lowest point in his life, but as a woman. But was this love or simply lust? He had no idea. Izuku, came Pony's voice, snapping the green-haired teen out of his thought. He blinked, suddenly realizing that his friend was giving him a worried look. Izuku, are you okay? You kinda spaced out. Sorry, said Izuku, a slight blush on his face. Just, well, thinking about things. For a moment, he wanted to tell her how he felt, about how much he enjoyed waking up at this ungodly hour just to talk with her, to see her smiling at him, and how it was 1,000,000 times better in person. To tell her all the things he had wanted to tell her when she had stayed at his place. But the more rational part of his mind warned against that. Soon she would be moving to Japan, starting a new school, and moving into the dorms. There was no need to make any of that awkward for her. They had time. Shaking his head to clear his thoughts, Izuku smiled at Pony in a reassuring manner. I'll tell you about it later. Promise. Anyways, do you know when you're dash? Pony, it's time to. Came a muffled voice of another girl speaking in English, the door opening causing both Izuku and Pony to jump a little in their seats. Izuku watched as Pony turned her head to look at who had entered her room, and, a moment later, another face filled the screen. The new face had a sly look in her brown eyes as looked at Izuku before speaking in decent Japanese. Should have known she'd be chatting with you. So, how's it going, broccoli boy? Hello, Jazz, said Izuku, his heart rate returning to normal at the sight of one of Pony's friends. Jasmine St. Peters, or Jazz as she preferred to be called, was a friend of Pony's and a girl Izuku had known almost as long as the horned girl herself. With her red hair tied in a ponytail and her heavily freckled face, she looked cute, though Izuku privately maintained that Pony was the cuter of the two. Things are going great. Oh, before I forget, I heard your audition went well. You know it, said Jazz with a big smile on her face. Which is why we're going out tonight to celebrate on our parents' dime. Unlike both him and Pony, Jazz had no desire to be in the hero business. Instead, she wished to devote her life to dancing either on the stage or to open up her own studio. And she happened to have the perfect quirk to help her do it. Her quirk, dancing flames, allowed her to bring existing fire around her legs and manipulate it into various shapes as she moved. He had seen this quirk in action a few times while at the Tsunatoris, especially when they were having an outdoor barbecue. Well, don't forget to send me tickets for your big debut, said Izuku with a chuckle. Only if you promise to give me an autographed picture of your hero rookie card or whatever you have over there in Japan, said Jazz. That thing will be worth a freaking fortune when you become one of the top heroes in the world. Pony, Jazz, come on, we need to get going, came another voice from off the screen, again in English. Only this one was not familiar to Izuku. Before he could say anything, another girl entered the frame of the screen. Upon seeing her, Izuku couldn't help but think that, due to both her voice as well as her half-closed eyes, that she had a bit of an airheaded personality. She was wearing a skin-tight shirt that showed off every curve, including her mammoth-sized breasts. Also, Izuku noticed that she had a thin tail that was the same color as her wavy, purple hair, ending with a heart-shaped spade at the end. Oh, who's this cutie? Asked the new girl as Pony and Jazz shot her annoyed looks. Before he could say anything, the girl's eyes widened for a moment before returning to their previous appearance. When she spoke next, the girl's voice came out almost like a purr while her tail wagged in the background. Isn't he the boy in the picture you were using to PLE dash? Sarah, they both cried together, leaping over to the newly named girl to tackle her. Within moments, Pony had her arms around Sarah's stomach as she tried to pull her away while Jazz had her hands on the girl's mouth. Or, at least, was trying to as Sarah was thrashing about. "What's the big deal?" demanded Sarah after pulling away Jazz's hand. "It's not like he understands what I'm saying." "Actually," began Izuku, speaking in English, "I can." His words caused Sarah to freeze, her eyes wide as she looked at Izuku. "I got to go. Bye, Izuku," screamed Pony as she made a mad dash to her screen. A half a second later the feed went dead, leaving a somewhat confused Izuku alone in his room. HR. "You know, Izuku, I'm going to miss these morning spars once you leave," said Secret Slash as he delivered a roundhouse kick to the boy's head. The teen spotted this, leaning backwards far enough so that the blow sailed above him before fluidly righting himself. Izuku then moved to Secret Slash's side, launching his own kick, which the older man blocked with his own. Rather than pull back, Izuku fired off another 3 kicks, which the master blocked with the same amount of ease. The green-haired teen looked like he was about to do it again, as if he were preparing to kick his opponent's leg enough times until it broke, but came short so that he instead spun around while bringing himself in closer for an arm strike. Secret Slash saw this, leaning to the side to avoid the blow before countering with his own strike. The teen reacted by raising his own forearm to block, their legs flying through the air as soon as their upper limbs connected. The two of them had been going at this since Izuku had stepped into the dojo a half an hour after his chat with Pony had been cut short. Well, he did take a few minutes to change out of his jogging suit and into his GI, but that's beside the point. The two had been relentless in their bouts, going at it without ever taking a single break. They just continued to attack each other, spinning and weaving around in a circle as their movements flowed effortlessly from one to the other, dodging blows by leaning back with incredible flexibility or simply moving to the side with so much grace that it almost looked like they were dancing. And even though Izuku's GI was growing damp with sweat, his breathing was heavy and was getting knocked down every single time, the teen would just get back to his feet ready to go again. What's more, the two had been at this for so long the empty, silent dojo that they had been in was starting to fill for the morning classes. Some of the people who were now milling into the dojo were students like Izuku from either the local middle or high school. The rest were sidekicks, sent here by their respective heroes to get in additional training for hand-to-hand combat. "Thank you, Sensei," said Izuku, noticing out of the corner of his eyes that several of those who had already arrived were seated on either side of the dojo hall, watching master and pupil in great interest. And Izuku could see that Secret Slash had done the same. Looks like class is about to begin," said Secret Slash as he dropped out of his fighting stance. Normally, when he did this he would give Izuku a short bow, but instead, he turned to get a nearby towel. As he began to dab his face with the towel, the older man continued, "I do hope you will continue to put this level of dedication with your hero training once you get into UA. I expect you to put up even more of a challenge once you return from break. If not, I will be sorely disappointed." I promise, Sensei," said Izuku, quickly bowing before the older man with so much speed and force that it looked like he might have fallen forward. And I'll make the most of the time I have left training with you." "I would have been disappointed if you didn't," said Secret Slash with a nod, turning to look at the green-haired teen with a bit of a smile. "But then again, there was never a doubt in my mind that you would continue your training under me for as long as possible." Then, the older man brought a hand to his chin while a look appeared on his face as if he were trying to recall something. "Tell me, did your friend manage to get in as well? The foreigner with the blonde hair and horns?" Izuku felt his face heat up as he recalled when he brought Pony with him to the dojo, wanting to show her where he had learned to fight so well with his quirk. "Why, yes, she made it in as well," he managed to say, earning a laugh from the older man. "Well then, that changes things a bit," said Secret Slash. "Izuku, while I know you will not slack in your training, please be sure to make time for her as well. Give your relationship with her the same level of dedication as you do with your training." Izuku's face began to burn all the brighter as his sensei said that, and as he brought his hands up to wave off the comment, he could hear a few people snickering. "We're in and not. I mean, we're in not yet," stammered Izuku, panicking at being called out on his feelings from his sensei out of the blue like this. Just how did he even know? "I mean, IP plan on it." Well, what I mean is that I would have thought someone like you would tell me to focus on my training and school." that I won't have time for those kinds of, distractions. Well now, said Secret Slash as he lowered his head again, a hand coming back up to his chin to stroke it over and over again. I can see why you would think that. To be completely honest, that was the mindset I had back in my old high school days. That I should devote every moment I was in school to my training, both with my quirk as well as my studies if I wanted to be the best hero. That everything else was merely a distraction. What a fool I was. Sensei, asked Izuku, staring at the older man who slowly raised his head to look at him. Young man, take it from an old pro. Do not waste the best years of your life, said Secret Slash as his eyes locked with Izuku's, the older man placing a hand on the younger's shoulder. Make as many memories as you can, both good and bad. Hang out with your classmates and friends beyond training to be a hero. Go out of your comfort zone and try new things, even if you wind up making a fool of yourself. Do not think that there will be time later, because later might never come. More so for people like us. He then shook his head as he removed his grip from Izuku's shoulder. Just enjoy yourself for as long as you can. I'll do my best, Sensei, said Izuku as he took in the older man's words. I hope so, because I also expect to hear about everything you've been up to when you return, said Secret Slash, his serious and intimidating face returning in full force. And if the only things I hear about are training, I shall have to ingrain this lesson into you. Shaking in fear, Izuku nodded as his sensei passed him by, ready to begin the lesson for the rest of the class. HR. Izuku sighed as he dropped his school bag on the floor next to his bed, walking towards his desk while unbuttoning the first couple of buttons on his black school uniform. The rest of the day had been long for the young Midoriya. Today's lesson with Secret Slash had been a bit more intense than normal, as he had sanctioned the use of quirks during their one-on-one bouts as long as they didn't do anything too destructive. All of Izuku's opponents had been challenging in their own rights, like this one student from Izuku's school who could heat up his body's temperature so that it matched boiling water, or a girl who could control her hair to such a degree that it became another fist. The hardest, however, was Secret Slash himself. The master of the dojo had a quirk that allowed him to have limited control of the air around his limbs. While he couldn't send massive blasts of wind at you to knock you off your feet or launch himself high into the air, his control allowed him to use the air like invisible blades. This meant that even if you dodged his fists or kicks, the wind would slash at you. Hence the hero name, Secret Slash. Thankfully, Izuku-sensei had only used very dull wind blades which never drew blood. As for school, that had been a bit of a mixed bag as everyone there knew he had gotten into UA. He had expected that his teacher as well as the principal would have congratulated him and was glad they had done it behind closed doors, but he had been somewhat embarrassed as he stood there. Sure, UA was extremely difficult to get into, but they talked about his achievement as if he had just returned from a war which he had single-handedly won. Thankfully, the rest of his classmates were far less intense as most just congratulated him along with a pat on the back. Sure, there were a few who voiced that he had just gotten lucky or showed clear disdain that they had failed to get in, but those people were so few that Izuku could have counted the number of people who did that on one hand, if he bothered to keep count. The only other thing that had happened was, well, the notice he got from some of the other girls in his school. Sure, he had some friends that were girls and had been asked out once or twice since starting school. Nothing major. But today, it was like a switch had been flipped. During lunch, a fight nearly broke out as over a dozen or so girls, many of whom he didn't know, wanted to sit next to him. While he had managed to slip away from that drama, he couldn't escape them entirely as they began to flirt with him between classes. Hopefully, this would last a couple of days or weeks before things died down. Now inside his room, and without checking the time, Izuku went over to the PC to boot it up. Within a few minutes, the image of Pony appeared on the screen looking like she had just gotten up. The first thing that caught his attention was that her hair was a little messy, with the golden locks sticking up and tangled about, as if she had been tossing and turning all night. He watched as she nervously moved some of her hair away from her eyes, which were slightly downcast while her face was a light shade of red. As for her sleepwear, a white two-piece with an apple pattern on it while also showing off a large amount of skin, looked extra crumpled today. Morning, she managed to mumble in English. Sorry about. What happened last time? As she spoke, Pony looked away as if there were something very interesting on the floor. It's fine. Not like she was the first person to think I couldn't understand what she was saying, said Izuku, speaking in English as well. It's not fine, Pony half shouted, surprising Izuku as she raised her head slightly, while also letting out a frustrated noise. Izuku, you're my best friend in the whole wide world. We've known each other since forever. And for Sarah to just walk in here and think that she could say whatever she wanted thinking you wouldn't understand, all I could think about last night was how hurt you must have felt. Then she went and broke her promise not to bring up the dash. Pony's eyes suddenly widened, her face turning a bright scarlet, as Izuku merely looked back in confusion. As Izuku sat there, watching Pony in the pits of her own embarrassment, a mix of emotions began to swirl inside of him. What she was saying right now, about him, was stirring that primal force within him again. That she was this worked up, worried about how he felt about it, made him feel special. But there was also a part of him that wanted to be there, at her side right now in order to comfort her, to reach out his hand to touch hers, to just hold her close so that he could whisper that everything was fine. He didn't know what Sarah had tried to say, nor was he going to ask Pony if she felt this uncomfortable about it. But what he could do was what All Might did, smile while telling her I am here. In his own way, of course. Pony, it's okay, said Izuku, smiling as gently as he could. To be honest, I barely thought about that all day. Really? She asked weakly, slowly managing to look Izuku in the eyes. I was barely fazed by it, said Izuku, still smiling. I mean, that was the first time I had ever seen or even heard about her. She's a stranger. Now, if Jazz or one of your other friends had done that, I'd be more worried about them. I mean, after all the times I spoke to them in English, I would have assumed they were hit by a quirk that altered their memories again. Izuku paused as Pony let out a brief laugh, no doubt remembering that one interesting afternoon. Seeing that her mood was improving, Izuku continued. And Pony, you should know that you can always text me or email me if you're worried about something. I might not have been able to answer it right away, but I would have as soon as I could. As Izuku spoke, he could see his friend's expression beginning to lighten. Bit by bit, her normal cheerful expression began to return that Izuku loved to see so much. That is, however, until he got to the end. Why didn't I think of that? Wailed Pony, reaching up to grab her large horns as she spoke. She then lowered her head completely so that all Izuku could see was the top of her head. I had to leave the party early because everyone else was more worried about getting me to feel better than having fun. Now I feel even worse. Well, we could put our heads together to figure out how to make it up to them, said Izuku in a helpful tone, Pony's head rising as he spoke. After all, we should have some more time before you have to get ready for school. Yes, they still had time. While the two talked, Izuku went over his own thoughts as well as the words of his sensei. No one knew how much time they had, especially heroes who risked their lives saving others. Some lived long, happy lives while others were not so lucky. That was something Izuku had known since he was 4 years old. So he would tell Pony how he felt about her, how she was the kindest girl with the bravest heart that he knew, that he loved how much she took other people's feelings into consideration, how her smile brightened up his day, and how her touch gave him a burst of energy. But now wasn't the right moment. He just wanted to wait just a little longer. Chapter 3, Dorms and Homeroom. Summary. First day at UA. Chapter text. Izuku took in a deep breath as he stood there, leaning against the balcony with an elbow propped on top of the railing while his chin rested upon the open-ended palm, taking in the sight before him. How fortunate had he been to have gotten a dorm room which overlooked the main building of UA High. Now, whenever he got up, he could look out at the building that had helped train many of the greatest heroes of all times. The school he had fought tooth and nail to get into, beating the odds so that he would be one of only 40 students out of hundreds of thousands of applicants to enter into their premier hero course. Starting tomorrow, he would be walking down those very halls. So, yeah, he wanted to savor this moment. While the sight of the building was impressive, his gaze would at times linger downwards whenever he heard others moving into the building. Looking down, he saw that there were 3 cars parked near the entrance to the dorm, the doors to the vehicles open as families hauled out large boxes before bringing them into the building. Staring at them for a moment brought a brief pang to his chest as he thought about his own parents. Not that they hadn't helped him move or were grateful to be rid of him. Far from it. They had hired movers to transport his stuff while they had taken a train, spending the night in a nearby hotel, and having a celebratory dinner in honor of Izuku getting into his dream school. Throughout the entire night and into the day, his mother's waterworks had continued to run, nearly flooding the room they had rented and making him glad they had taken a room on the first floor. And when they were moving his stuff into the dorms, well, the janitorial staff here at the dorms had to follow behind them due to the large puddles she was leaving behind. Yes, it had been embarrassing, but Izuku was thankful that his mother was so sad as well as so happy to see her son moving on like this. As for his father, the man had hugged Izuku multiple times as they set up the room, while repeatedly telling him how proud he was of his son. Then he joked, at least Izuku hoped it was a joke, about turning Izuku's room into a study, which only seemed to cause his mother to weep more while pounding Hisashi on the head with both fists. Now they were gone, having left a couple of hours ago to head back home. Izuku had to admit that, while the idea of living here at UA would be an amazing experience, he was going to miss his family. He had never been apart from them for more than a couple of days, and now he probably would only ever get to see them during long breaks. Sure, he could do video calls and the like, but it wouldn't be the same. But he was sure he would get used to it in time. After all, didn't people his age move out all the time for school? And he wasn't alone. Pony was. A sudden realization overtook Izuku, causing the team to push off the railing while his eyes widened. Pony. The last time they had talked was right before he and his parents left the house. Pony was already at UA for a day at that point. Before they hung up, Izuku had promised his friend that he would call her as soon as his parents left to find out where their rooms were. Feeling like he could go into panic mode at any moment, Izuku got off the railing before dashing into his dorm room to find his phone. Rather than the typical shared bedroom, the room reminded him of a studio apartment. At the front of the room, starting at the door and going all the way to the opposite side of the wall, was a small cooking area that consisted of a double burner stove with a microwave sitting on a counter next to it along with a mini fridge. The rest of the room was decided for his living space, with his bed pressed against the wall close to the sliding door. A desk had been provided for him on which his new laptop sat, plugged in, and with the Wi-Fi password already saved into it. There was no bookshelf or anything like that connected to the desk, so Izuku had stacked all of his hero notebooks neatly in a pile in the far corner. As for his pictures, well, Izuku thought it might make him look a bit weird if he ever invited anyone into his dorm room, and they saw the massive amounts of pictures of him and Pony. So instead he had only brought two with him, the one of them in their bathing suits and one of just Pony. The other picture on his desk was of himself and his parents taken right before they took him to UA. Next to the desk was a door leading to a tiny bathroom. Thankfully, the phone was on the desk, plugged into its charger. After picking it up, the teen quickly unlocked it and saw to his relief that no one had called. Taking a breath, Izuku went to his contacts before pressing on Pony's whose icon was a picture of her smiling. Instantly, the phone began to ring, and before the third, it was picked up. "Izuku, there you are," came Pony's voice in Japanese. "I was getting worried." "Yeah, sorry about that," replied Izuku, scratching the back of his neck as he moved over to the bed and sat down. Kind of got a little distracted. You know, being here at UA and all. Maybe I should have called you as soon as I got here." No, said Pony in a dismissive tone. "That was Midoriya family time. I'm sure they would have loved the extra help, but they probably wanted to spend as much time as possible with just you. And I sort of know what you mean. It took me a while to, calm down once it hit me that I was here as well." The two paused, sharing a brief laugh together. "Glad you're not upset," said Izuku once they stopped laughing. "So what room are you in?" "I'm in 610. 610? Came Pony's voice, excitement radiating off of it. Izuku opened his mouth to say something, but the sound of a door being slammed cut him off. He could then hear the familiar sounds of hooves running over the phone, while at the same time hearing a similar sound outside in the hallway. Before Izuku could piece together what was happening, there was a pounding on his door that caused the teen to leap to his feet. His heart began to pound as he moved over to the door, opening it as another wave of pounding started. And there, in the doorway, was Pony. She stood there, hand raised and balled into a fist as if ready to begin knocking again. Izuku could see she was wearing the same red, white, and blue crop top that showed off a delicious amount of her stomach that she often wore during their video chats. Below that, she was wearing jeans that hugged her strong legs nicely, stopping right at her hooves. Yet the thing that really caught his attention was the sparkle that appeared in her eyes as a huge smile appeared on her face and the sparkle in her eyes. "We're on the same floor," she cried out in English, jumping with joy. "I'm in room 604. That's amazing," Izuku managed to say, a smile appearing on his face while his heart began to race just a bit faster. He had known that the UA dorms were co-ed, so they would be definitely living in the same building. But what were the odds that they would be living just down the hall from each other? Silently, he thanked every deity he could for this. "So," Pony said in a sing-song tone, switching to Japanese as she did so while placing her hands behind her back as she leaned forwards a bit. "You going to invite me in?" "Oh, right," exclaimed Izuku, jumping a little before inviting her inside. As Pony walked inside, Izuku noticed that she was swaying her hips slightly as she did, her small tail swishing back and forth in a way that caused his face to turn red. He could feel his pants growing tighter while the primal force within him let out an approving growl, urging him to make her his. But Izuku fought back that feeling as he quickly closed the door. "Looks like we have a similar layout," said Pony, breaking Izuku from his thoughts. The green-haired teen looked over to his blonde friend just in time to see her glancing at him, a curious expression on her face as she pointed at the small kitchen area. "Seems a little weird to have that, don't you think? I mean, the school is providing us with all our meals, so why have a kitchen?" Izuku shrugged. "Honestly, I have no idea. Lunch Rush is in charge of the cafeteria, so I can't really see any sane person passing up a chance to eat a meal prepared by a pro hero like him. Maybe it's for late-night snacks or something." "Maybe," agreed Pony as she moved a little deeper into the room, hands behind her back as she looked around her. "Wow, you really held back with your All Might collection." She then turned her head, giving Izuku that smile he loved so very much. "Please don't tell me you needed another truck to bring it here." "It's not that bad," exclaimed Izuku. The walls of his dorm were mostly bare, Izuku having brought only a couple of his All Might posters. Mainly the ones that had slogans like "You can do it" and other such motivations that Izuku thought he might need. But beyond that, and his All Might alarm clock seated on the nightstand next to his bed, that was it. "I just figured that since we were going to be taught by the real All Might, I could leave a few things behind." Still smiling, Pony cocked an eyebrow at him. "You didn't trust the movers with the action figures, did you?" "They valuable," shouted Izuku in spite of himself. 90% of them have been discontinued." Pony merely let out a laugh as she continued to look around the room. The only time she paused was when she spotted the pictures Izuku had on his desk. The green-haired teen grew a little nervous as she stood there, staring particularly at the one from the water park. And as he stood there, he began to grow a little nervous. Had he made a mistake bringing that picture? Had he somehow offended? No, that couldn't be it because Izuku knew she had that same picture hanging on one of her walls back at her house. So what was? "That was a fun day," Pony eventually said after several long seconds of silence, her cheeks slightly red as she looked down at the floor. "You know, we should really do it again." "Why, yeah," agreed Izuku, his face turning red. "I think there might be one around here. But if there isn't, maybe we could ask the school if we could use one of the pools. That, or maybe head to a nearby beach." At that, Pony's excitement returned. "I'd love a trip to the beach," she exclaimed with a twirl. The horn girl then quickly moved to Izuku, a smile on her face as she quickly took a hold of his hand. "Now to make sure you know how to get to my room." "WHWA," was all Izuku could say as he found himself being pulled out of his room by Pony, barely able to close his room as they exited. Doors flashed in and out of Izuku's vision as he was swiftly brought down the hall, barely able to read any of the door numbers until they finally stopped in front of one that read 604. Bouncing on her hooves, Pony quickly opened her door before bringing Izuku inside and closing the door behind them. Now inside someone else's dorm for the first time, Izuku saw that Pony had been right. Their rooms were, for the most part, identical. Pony's kitchen area, he saw, already had 2 bowls of fruit, one containing Honeycrisp apples while the other held Granny Smith. The bed had been turned sideways so that the headboard was pressed against the wall while the foot of said bed faced the desk. making it feel as if the room was cut in two. Orange blankets were draped over the bed, with an equally orange rug having been placed on the side. Nightstands had been placed on either side of the bed, with lamps on both that resembled tangled wood, as well as a couple of framed pictures and a couple of Pony's manga. No doubt placed there in case she wanted to do a little bit of reading before bed. On the wall above her head was a poster of America's #1 hero, Stars and Stripes. "Doesn't look like you're going to be doing much studying," Izuku said, pointing towards the desk. Sitting on the desk was a large, plasma TV that took up the majority of space on it, with a Blu-ray/DVD player hooked up next to it. Additional bookshelves had been placed on either side of the desk, making the place feel smaller. Izuku didn't need to move closer to know that everything in those cases were the girl's collection of anime and manga. "I plan on doing it right here," explained Pony as she moved to the bed, dropping her behind onto it with enough force that she bounced a few times. "The way I see it, we are going to be working our bodies and quirks to the extreme. We're going to be so sore that it would be harmful to sit in a hard chair, leaning forward as we do our homework. I bet doing our homework or studying will be much more comfortable like this." Without another word, Pony's horns shot into the air while a new set instantly regrew upon her head. The horns in the air then flew around to Izuku's back, where they then hooked onto his sides before pushing him face first onto the bed. As Izuku took a deep breath, he felt the rustle of the bed and turned just in time to see Pony had moved to that she laid next to him with their faces inches apart. "What do you think?" she asked. Izuku smirked at her. "It's nice, but maybe a little too comfortable. I'd hate to imagine you laying here, trying to study, and then falling asleep using your math book as a pillow." "That only happened once," laughed Pony, her face a little flushed as she threw a light punch to Izuku's side. "That I know about," he shot back with a laugh, earning another punch from the laughing girl. "Then it looks like you'll be spending plenty of time with me in this room to make sure that doesn't happen," said Pony, her voice full of mock authority. "That, or I'll just study in your room." Grinning, Izuku nodded. From there, Izuku didn't know how long they laid there talking. Neither of them knew what their schedule would be, having found out that it would be sent to them via email the morning of their first day. Knowing that there were only 2 first-year hero course classes, the two began to talk about the what-ifs. They knew they were lucky to be on the same floor of the dorms, so it might be pushing their luck to think that they would be sharing the same homeroom. So instead, they just hoped that they could be in at least a few classes together. And if not that, then they could just catch up during there. Plus, there were plenty of things they could do, like working out together or just chilling in Pony's room. And by the time they were ready to call it a day, stars filled the night sky. But as he got up, Izuku noticed that one of the pictures by Pony's bed was the same one of them at the water park. "HR. Where is it? Where is it?" Izuku repeated this one sentence to himself, over and over again as he walked down the hallways of UA at a quickened pace. His hands gripped the straps of his backpack as he moved through the clusters of students hanging around in their gray school uniforms identical to the one he was now sporting. Had he had more time, he would have taken the opportunity to write down some notes on some of the more unique appearances some of them had while trying to figure out what their quirks were. Izuku wanted to curse under his breath. Perhaps he should have waited for Pony so they could have tried finding their homerooms together. And he would have had it not been for the insistence of his blonde friend who, sadly, had overslept, only being awoken by him knocking on her door for the better part of 10 minutes. Not wanting them both to be late for their first day of class, to which she would have been the cause of, Pony had insisted multiple times by shouting through the closed door for Izuku to head on out without her. Now, he wished he had been as stubborn as her, because maybe if they had put their heads together they could have found the classroom. That or they both could have been late together at the very least. Izuku's eyes widened when he finally found the massive doors for the first-year homerooms. After taking a breath to calm himself, Izuku reached for the door handle only to pause as a loud commotion within could now be heard. Blinking a bit, Izuku leaned forward a bit so as to make out what was going on, as he really didn't want to get into any drama on his first day. Judging by the sounds he could make out, there were 2 of them and both of them sounded male. Most likely his classmates given the tones they were using. One was demanding that someone get his feet off something. A chair? No, desk. The other student shouted out a violent remake that seemed to stir up some old memories within Izuku. Again, Izuku blinked. Something about that voice, along with the threat, was somehow familiar to Izuku, but he could not quite place it. None of his classmates back in middle school had gotten into UA, and even if they had, none of them talked like that. So who could this person be? Curiosity seemed to urge Izuku forward, to open the door and see who this person was. But before he could open the door, Izuku noticed that this was room 1A. He blinked a moment before pulling out his phone and looking at the email the school had sent him. Upon seeing it, he groaned as he began moving down the hall again. That wasn't his room, he needed 1B. Whoever that voice belonged to wasn't important enough for him to risk being late on his first day. Thankfully, Izuku didn't need to go very far as 1B was just down the hallway. Quickly, he entered the much quieter room full of students who were just in their seats. Most turned their heads to look at him, no doubt wondering if the teacher had just walked in the room. But when they saw who it was, they either gave him a curious look or just returned to staring at the board in front of them as, "Hey, I know you," shouted one student as he suddenly stood up. Izuku, as well as many of the people around the other student, jumped before looking at the silver-haired teen as he pointed a figure at Izuku. But it didn't feel like it was accusatory or anything like that, for the boy was smiling as he did this, showing off his sharp, pointy teeth. "You're the guy who took down the zero-pointer. Dude, I was in the same testing field as you. That was intense." Izuku suddenly became aware that many of his fellow classmates were now looking at him with renewed interest. He could feel their gazes, sizing him up to see if he was as powerful as the claims suggested. "Really?" came the voice of another student, one who looked like she had a mushroom growing on the top of her head. "Doesn't really look like the type, to be honest." "You calling me a liar?" demanded the haired teen as his hand balled into a fist, his angry glare directed towards the mushroom girl. Said just looked back at him before shrugging, a tired expression on her face. Though, from what Izuku could tell from her body expression, it wasn't that she was bored with the conversation. Rather, it was as if she was just tired, like she hadn't gotten enough sleep the night prior. "Anything's possible. It would be foolhardy to judge any of us on looks alone," said another student, whose appearance gave Izuku the image of a beast man. His classmate's uniform was well kept and neat, as was the brown fur that covered nearly all of his exposed skin save for his face. He also had on thick, rectangular glasses with black rims. That, along with his expression, gave him a more scholarly look to him despite the large canines protruding from his jaw. "That's what I'm talking about," shouted the silver-haired teen as he pointed at the beast teen. The silver-haired student then moved towards Izuku, who had remained rooted in place, before extending his hand. "The name's Tetsu 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 Tetsu." Izuku blinked for a moment before smiling, reaching out with his own hand to shake Tetsu Tetsu's. "Pleased to meet you. My name is Izuku Midoriya." "Midoriya, huh?" replied Tetsu Tetsu as they shook. "Not a bad grip you got there. Despite how you look, I can tell you're pretty strong without your quirk." "Thanks, but I doubt it's anything too special," replied Izuku as he let go of the other's hand. "I mean, yeah, I've been working out for years, but my focus has been more into technique." "Hey, don't go selling yourself too short there," shouted Tetsu Tetsu with a savage grin. "I can tell you put up a pretty good fight. Hopefully we can dash." Tetsu Tetsu was suddenly cut off as the door opened loudly before a panting figure appeared in the doorway. "I made it," panted Pony, head down and slightly bent over. "Pony," said Izuku, eyes wide as he couldn't believe what he was seeing was really real. Upon hearing her name, Pony's head rose with a start. Her own eyes went wide as well, those blue orbs staring right into Izuku's green ones. Everything else seemed to fall by the wayside as, slowly, large smiles appeared on the faces of the two teens as they realized what this meant. Then, in a flash, the two shot towards the other in a move that took everyone else aback. When Izuku and Pony were close enough, their hands went straight to the other's hips to hold the other as close as possible. Not even a second later, the two began to jump into the air in perfect synergy, their hair bouncing all over the place as they did. "We're in the same class. We got in. We got in, and we're in the same class." The two began to shout as they continued to jump up and down, Izuku speaking in Japanese while Pony spoke in English. Their jubilation captured the attention of the rest of the class, finding it hard to look away from the two smiling teens. While none of them knew what their relationship was, ranging from family members to friends and even lovers, all would agree that the scene before them was sort of precious. That these two just seemed to wear their hearts on their sleeves in this adorable moment. Both Izuku and Pony continued their little dance of joy even as the door opened again, revealing a much larger man dressed in a hero costume. The man's attire was mostly red with silver-covered boots that went to his knees, a silver belt, and silver arm gauntlets, which one of them had a tube connecting it to his back. The man's skin was tanned, showing that he spent most of his time out in the open with white spiky hair that was cut short. An orange visor covered his eyes, but it was transparent enough to know who he was looking at. And right now, his gaze was focused on the jumping duo. "Well," began the man, briefly coughing into a fist to catch their attention. "I'm glad to see you're excited to be here. However, class is now starting, so take your seats." Though his tone was gruff, the slight smile he gave them was of the friendly sort. Grateful that they weren't going to be reprimanded for acting so childishly, Izuku and Pony gave a short sorry before heading to the only open seats left. As for the man, he moved further into the classroom, only stopping once he was behind the desk. "My name is Sekijiro Kan, and I shall be your homeroom teacher for the next 3 years here at UA. Let me begin by offering all of you a well-earned congratulations. I have gone over all the footage we have on everyone here who took the entrance exam, as well as overseeing those who got in via special recommendation. From what I have seen, there is no mistake in my mind that all of you belong here. That your passing was no accident or stroke of luck. Through your hard work and actions, you have proven to the staff that you have what it takes to become the next generation of heroes. All of you should be proud of that." Izuku felt himself grinning at Kan's words. Looking around, he saw that others were sitting up straight as they took in their teacher's words with pride on their faces. "Now your real journey begins," continued Kan, his face becoming far more serious as he looked around the classroom. "Because getting into the UA was the easy part. All of that hard work that you used to get into this school will need to be taken to the next level, plus ultra style. More so in the hero course than anywhere else. Within this class, it will be the duty of every single one of your teachers to take you to your breaking point over and over again. Every barrier, every limitation you thought you had when you first walked through those gates will be challenged and hopefully shattered so that, when you leave, you will be a better version of the person you were when you came in. We will challenge you like nothing you could have imagined before, demanding you give us your all, and then some." As Kan spoke, his voice began to rise with passion that was felt within Izuku. He could feel his hands gripping the desk, holding onto it as if he would be sent flying backwards by his own excitement. Out of the corner of his eye, he could see that the others were filling it out too. Some had huge smiles on their faces, leaning forward in their desks as they took in every word this man spoke. Others did their best to remain composed, but Izuku could see it. It was in their eyes, that fire of passion that they all shared. This was why they were here. This was why they chose this school over all the others, to be the best. "With that said Kan, his voice a bit more composed now as he looked down at his desk. Your position in this class is never fully secure, even in your final year. There are those in the general studies, support course, and the business course who wish to be where you are all sitting. That, for one reason or another, were unable to pass the entrance exam. And during events like the UA Sports Festival, they will get their second chance to shine. To show not only us but the entire world that they belong right here in this class. That one of you should be removed." Kan paused for a moment as he crossed his arms over his chest, his eyes surveying the class as they took in the meaning of his words. For his part, Izuku found himself somewhat conflicted. A part of him trembled at the notion that, after all the work he had put into his training over all these years, someone else might come out of nowhere and take his spot. What would happen to him then? Would he be kicked out or placed in something like general studies? But the other part of him, especially after giving it a moment of thought, caused him to raise his head as a look of determination appeared on his face. UA was training them to be the best pro heroes out there, and this was all part of it. To be a pro, you had to keep pushing yourself even when you finally had your own agency. You had to keep improving yourself, keep saving lives and protecting people from danger to stay in the ranks. And if you slipped up, failed too many times, or just weren't that active, had a horrible scandal, then you could lose everything you had worked for. Glancing around, Izuku saw that the rest of his classmates were slowly coming to the same realization as they too grew determined looks on their faces. All of them understood that this was the first lesson they would be receiving here to prepare them for their futures. And when Izuku looked at Kan, he saw that the pro hero had a slight smile on his face. Eventually, a girl with orange hair tied in a side ponytail raised her hand. Ah, Sensei, if something like that does happen, how will you choose who leaves? Will you be kicking out the student with the lowest grades or the weakest quirk? She asked, breaking the silence. Well now, began Kan as he scratched the back of his head. That's a bit of a tricky question as it will depend on the class. I will tell you this. I consider it a personal failure to boot any of my students. It's my job as your teacher to prepare you, to make sure you have all the tools you need to succeed. As long as I see that you are giving it your all, putting in the time and seeking help when you need it, you'll be fine. But there are times when you need to accept your failures and shortcomings. There is only so much that I can do, and the rest is up to you. If you are giving it your all, studying as hard as you can, working with every fiber of your being, and still not making any headway, well, we'll have a talk. A serious one to discuss if you really are fit for this profession. It's not something any of you may want to hear, but we need to be realistic. And I promise that if there are no other options left for you here, then I will do everything in my power to get you into the field where you will better flourish. However, continued Kan, his eyes narrowing as his face hardened, if I find out any of you have been caught cheating, bullying the other students from different courses, or not even putting in the bare minimum of effort, then I won't wait till I find another student to take your place. Is that understood? Yes, Kin-sensei, said the entire class as one. Kin nodded, his face softening. Good. Now, we have some time before we need to head down for orientation. So how about we take this time to get to know one another? He then paused, looking at Izuku and pointing at him. Since you got the highest score in the entrance exam, in this class, how about we start with you? Tell us your name and your quirk. Feeling the eyes of the class on him once more, Izuku stood. Ah, why yes. Hi, my name is Izuku Midoriya, and my quirk is called Bone of My Sword. Chapter 4, Battle Class. Summary. Class 1, B's first hero class. Chapter text. Come on, Izuku, cried Pony as the two walked away from the dorm building towards the school. Time was on their side. Neither hero student moving faster than a light walk with their bags in their hands. You know I'm right. Just admit it. Izuku shook his head. I just don't see it, he said as he gave a sideways glance at the horned girl as she puffed up her cheeks. The girl falling in love with the guy just because he saved her life once? I don't know. Just feels like a tired cliché. It's an awesome cliché, shouted Pony as she swung her arms around, Izuku holding back a laugh at this sight. If it wasn't, then it wouldn't even be a cliché. Besides, it happens in real life all the time. How many love letters does All Might and Stars and Stripes get from the people they save? I don't think that's the same thing as in the animes you love, said Izuku, giving Pony a small smile before letting out a sigh. I mean, you are right that there are people out there who do that, which is why All Might's home address is unlisted. The number of stalkers he's gotten over the years is just insane. I heard that a few people even put themselves in harm's way just to see them again. Izuku then shook his head. Maybe that's why I just don't buy the romance in that anime. Pony just let out a sigh as they approached the entrance of the school, ready to begin their second day here at UA. And after the first day, both of them were pumped and ready to go. After the class had introduced themselves, Izuku quickly taking notes about everyone's quirks as they did so, they all headed down to the entrance ceremony. Nearly all of the new students looked excited to be there with some, like Pony, having stars in their eyes as they listened to several of the staff members giving speeches. Izuku, however, had been a bit distracted at first when he saw that one class, 1A, was missing. Seeing how the other teachers noticed this, some even shaking their heads when they looked to where the missing class was supposed to be, was worrisome. That is until the star of the show arrived on stage, All Might. Just seeing him in person was almost enough for Izuku's quirk to go off. Almost. His speech was simple and full of some one-liners, but no one really minded it. It was just great to listen to the legend, knowing that in the coming days he would be teaching the hero course. After that, syllabuses and class schedules were handed out before dismissing the students for the day. While many of their class left the campus grounds, the two instead got a meal in the mess hall, where Izuku went full fanboy when he saw that it was the hero lunch rush serving them. From there, the pair just took a stroll around the campus, enjoying the perfect weather as they talked. Most of it being their hopes for the year, how the heroes would be teaching their classes, and what heroics with All Might would be like. That last subject seemed to take up the majority of their conversation, the two seeming to try and one-up the other with imaginary scenarios. Would they be fighting villains on a boat with the weather turning sour, rocking it back and forth, or would they be in the middle of a city on fire trying to save as many people as possible while fending off hidden foes? Both laughed as they spoke, knowing full well that such things were too advanced for first-year students. Even here at the top hero school that was known to push their students, all of that seemed a little excessive. But, then again, the school did unleash that zero-pointer on them. Then when it got late, the two returned to their rooms to get out of their uniforms before meeting up in Pony's room. Now with both of them wearing shorts and plain t-shirts, Pony's shirt showing off a part of her stomach like usual. The two of them laid comfortably on Pony's bed, ready to spend the rest of their free time watching various animes from the American Girls collection. What made it more comfortable for Izuku was that, since her bed was a bit on the small side, the two of them had to get close. So much so that their legs touched, feeling her smooth leg against his own, while he could feel her breast slightly pressed against his own chest. And maybe it was his imagination, but there were times when he thought he could feel her hand tracing his muscles. Back in the present, Pony puffed her cheeks slightly as they neared their classroom. Okay then, what kind of romance would you believe in? Izuku felt his cheeks burning slightly before looking away. Well, I guess, if I had to pick, I really enjoyed the romance in Toradora. That caused Pony's eyes to widen before the horned girl rushed in front of Izuku, spinning on her hooves so that she was looking right into his eyes. Really? She asked while walking backwards. I never took you for the type to like a girl like Taiga. I would have thought you would have shipped Ruji with Minori. Izuku just shrugged. That's just how I prefer the romance. I mean, sure, their first meeting got off to a rough start, and Taiga breaking into Ruji's home was a little over the top. But, all the same, I like how they got closer the more time they spent together. Getting to know the other, as well as their crushes, made the whole thing feel more real, I guess. Besides, Minori's randomness began to get a little annoying after a while. That's true, said Pony with a smile. At first, her smile was warm and soft only to turn more devious as she placed a hand on Izuku's chest, stopping the green-haired boy in his tracks. So, if that's the sort of romance that you like, then have you seen Kawaii Kariba Hentai Demo Suki and I Neti Kuromasaka? Izuku felt his face turning so red that it might as well have become his quirk, beads of sweat running down his face as he stared at the blonde whose eyes grew with her smile. You've seen it, haven't you? Yes, replied Izuku, slumping while sighing in defeat. And? Asked Pony. I liked it up until the end, said Izuku. I mean, I like how Keiki got to know all the various girls. Like finding out those other sides to them, learning why they like their fetishes, and even participating to a degree. Just with the end with his sister, I just felt a little cheated that they went with that. What can you do? Asked Pony as the pair made their way into the classroom, unaware of the eyes upon them and the grins most of the class had. HR. The sounds of flesh hitting flesh filled the gym, feet skidding against the floor as the two combatants fought. Izuku's movements were fluid as he bent backwards to dodge a punch from his classmate Kendo before moving his body to deliver a kick to the orange-haired girl's side. The girl saw this, jumping up high into the air to avoid it before raising her own leg up high so as to send an axe kick his way. Smirking, Izuku spun out of the way as Kendo landed, rolling onto the ground before getting back up and facing the green-haired teen. Not willing to give her an inch, Izuku made a leg sweep to which the girl leapt forward with her fist pulled back. Seeing it, Izuku leaned back to allow the blow to miss him, waiting for Kendo to land on the mat they were currently fighting on before leaping to his own feet, which he then followed up by swinging his body around to deliver a backhanded blow. Such an attack was easily blocked by Kendo's raised forearm, the girl wincing from the force behind the attack before she countered. It was in the afternoon, morning classes and lunch having been done with, which meant it was time for the hero course studies. However, Since All Might was teaching Class 1A and it was scheduled to take the entire afternoon, Ken had something special planned for them. He had seen how well they fought robots, but the best way to gauge their fighting potential was to see how well they fought against a thinking human being. Not only would it show him their overall skills, but it would also be a great chance to break in their hero uniforms before they began more intense hero classes. This got the class pumped up as they were then told to get changed into their hero gear and then meet Ken in Gym Delta. It took the class a half an hour to get changed and make their way towards one of the smaller gyms. The floor of this gym was heavily padded, with dozens of small circles painted onto the mat, while an even larger circle was placed in the middle. It was within this middle circle that the students found Ken standing, the man wasting no time in explaining how today's lesson would work. 2 students would fight in 2 different matches, the first being without quirks while the second they would be allowed to use them. Each match would last for 10 minutes with the exception being if Can, who would be acting as the referee, felt one of the 2 could not continue. As for the rest of the students, they were to sit and watch their classmates with no warning who would be next. Izuku, dressed in his hero costume, was the first one to be called. His hero costume looked like a Shaolin monk kung fu-styled outfit that lacked any sleeves. The top of his costume was green, the full length of it going down to his knees, with white trimming that went across his chest. A white sash was tied around his waist, and his pants were white as well. His footwear, red shoes with special insoles, clashed a bit with the aesthetic, yet Izuku needed to be as practical with his attire as possible. And it seemed his opponent felt the same way. Dressed in a knee-length teal-colored qipao and a black, double-breasted black corset, Kendo looked very much the martial artist. Now here they were. How much time had passed since Ken had called the match to start? No one, not the 2 in the ring nor the students watching them, had any idea at this moment, for time had lost all meaning to them. Sweat was beginning to roll down the faces of Izuku and Kendo, their breathing beginning to get heavy. Yet neither fighter seemed to mind as they continued to fight each other within the circle they were currently in. They moved in tandem, circling each other as they exchanged blow after blow with excited smiles on their faces. The world around them no longer seemed to exist as the 2 were caught up in this bout, finding the other to be at the same level of experience. Then, just as Izuku was about to launch a double kick, Ken called out time. Upon hearing this, Izuku managed to divert his blow at the last moment, missing Kendo. Very good," said Kan, giving the teens a fanged smile along with a nod. Both Izuku and Kendo stood there for a moment panting, the green-haired boy's eyes looking over at his classmates. Most of them were staring at them, gawking as they seemed to be still taking in the skills the 2 had just shown them. More than one had an expression that nearly screamed, "I'm glad I didn't have to fight either of them." But one, Izuku noticed, was smiling as she leaned forward from where she was seated. "Way to go, Izuku," shouted Pony in English, pumping her fist into the air while her blue eyes seemed to sparkle. "You're doing great." Izuku's heart leapt a little in his chest, not noticing the look Kendo and a few others were giving him. "Now it is time for the second round," said Ken as he crossed his arms as he spoke. Yet his smile faded as he glanced over to the rest of the class, Izuku following his gaze to see that more than a few students looked ready to object. Then, the teacher turned to look at the pair within the ring. "Unless you 2 are too tired and need a break." "I can keep going," said Kendo as she intertwined her fingers, pushing them forward. "How about you, Midoriya? Now that the warm-up is done, are you ready to get serious?" Her words caused a few people in the class to audibly gulp, surprised to hear her call something so intense a mere warm-up, that she still had plenty of gas in her tank. Izuku, for his part, chuckled as he cracked his neck loudly. "I was about to say the same thing," he said before getting into his fighting stance. He locked eyes on Kendo's as she too got into her stance. "Begin," shouted Kan. Kendo was the first to move, rushing towards Izuku with her fist pulled back ready to strike. Before Izuku could move, Kendo's fist grew at an alarming speed and did not stop until it looked like he could be held in its grasp. That size was not just for show either, as Izuku, who was unable to dodge in time due to both the surprise and the size of the fist, was thrown backwards. At first he rolled out of control, his body reeling slightly in pain, before managing to take control of his movements before landing in a crouched position. He paused there for a moment, feeling a trickle of blood escaping from his lips. "Not bad," he whispered. "If it wasn't for my quirk, that attack would have broken or cracked a couple of my bones." Izuku then sprang forward, one of his palms open as he charged towards Kendo. The orange-haired girl pulled back her fist once more, her intent clearly broadcasted once more. However, just as she swung her massive fist, Kendo let out a howl of pain as blood began to fall onto the mat, Izuku twirling around her. Taking deep breaths, Kendo looked over to Izuku, and her eyes widened in horror. Coming out of Izuku's palm was a long, white spike whose sharp tip was dripped in blood from the slash he had made across Kendo's large hand. Gritting her teeth, Kendo shrunk her hand back to its normal size, her cut thankfully shrinking as well. With a war cry, Izuku's opponent raised both her fists into the air, where they then enlarged. But, as they came down, the green-haired teen moved out of the way, spinning his whole body as he did so, as if this were a dance. And before Kendo could lift her fists off the mat, Izuku slashed at her leg, giving her another small cut from a second-long spike coming out of his other palm. Rather than shrinking her fists, Kendo flattened her hand before using one of them to attack with a sideways chop. Still spinning, Izuku jumped over the attack while turning his body to the side in order to deliver more cuts to Kendo's fist. But, while he was in the air, Kendo took this moment to grab him with her second large hand. From the shoulders down, the orange-haired girl had Izuku in her grasp, where she gave a firm squeeze that made her opponent grunt in pain. "It ends here," yelled Kendo, raising her hand high above her head. Izuku's eyes widened, surprised that she could lift him with such ease, followed by a swift realization on what the girl planned to do. Thinking fast, Izuku pressed his arms against the massive fingers just as he saw that mat coming closer at a frightening speed. Thankfully, just before impact, dozens of white, thorn-like protrusions exited his skin, digging into Kendo's flesh. The orange-haired girl let out a cry of pain, her grip loosening so as to allow Izuku to escape and land on the mat. "That was close for both of us," thought Izuku as he looked at Kendo. Blood dripped from her hand as it quickly became smaller, the large gashes and cuts thankfully shrinking with it. If my arms weren't out, I would have had to use those spikes inside her grasp. Even if the wounds shrink, the damage to her hand might have been more severe. "Time for a change of tactics," said Izuku to himself, the spikes in his palms retracting while the thorns on his arms vanished into his skin as well. Once they were gone, new white objects shot out from each of his arms. They all came out just above his elbows, moving up a bit before curving back down, so they ended at his fist. Once they were done, Izuku went on the attack. He spun around to gain some momentum once he was close enough to Kendo, slamming one of the white masses against her side. Spit launched out of her mouth, the wind temporarily taken out of her lungs thanks to the attack. But only for a moment, as her fist shrunk again as she moved them right between the space between her and Izuku. The boy tried to get out of the way, but her hands simply grew faster than he could move, knocking Izuku onto his back. Kendo was on him in an instant, getting on top of the one who had repeatedly cut her and bringing down her enlarged fist. For his part, Izuku brought up his arms to block, the massive fist colliding with the white masses. Pain filled his arms upon contact, almost to the point where it became numb for a moment, but the mass held firm. And when Kendo lifted her fist to try and punch him again, Izuku slammed his arm against her to knock her off. "That's enough," said Ken as both of his students got to their feet. Panting, the pair allowed their bodies to return to normal as Ken moved to the center of the circle facing the rest of his class. "Both of you, good job. Kendo, bandage your hands and see recovery girl at the end of class. Tetsu, Shishida, you're up next." Both boys stood as Izuku made his way back to the rest of the class, many of them gazing at the teen in awe. No doubt they were surprised to see such an average, plain-looking teen to be such an experienced fighter. That, and having a powerful quick. Well, everyone but Pony, who was just beaming at him as she bounced in her spot with stars in her eyes. "That was amazing, Izuku," she declared as Izuku sat down beside her, wincing a little as he did so. "Even more so than the last time I saw you fight at the dojo." Izuku just smiled as he watched Pony making a few jabbing motions in the air, taking full note of her costume for the first time since they started class. and trying his best not to blush. It resembled a jockey uniform, mostly colored orange and skin-tight, showing off all her curves. Looking at it, his eyes were drawn to the black belts around her collarbone, biceps, hips, and boots that had stirrups on either side. She also had a horse halter on her head, with a rope dangling from behind. "Thanks. All the practice really paid off," said Izuku, looking away from the blonde while scratching the back of his head. "Though, I still have a long way to go." "I think we both do," said Kendo as she suddenly sat down next to Izuku, putting the final wrapping on her hands as she did so. The girl then let out a sigh before facing Izuku. Her expression warmed despite what happened in the match. "Not a bad match. You were using the secret/school of martial arts, right?" "You've heard of it?" asked Izuku, eyebrows raised in surprise. Kendo nodded before turning to look at their fellow classmates and their fight. "A couple of times. Faced a few of their students in a couple of tournaments. Odd that I never saw you there. With skills like that, you could have been a real contender." "Well, depends when these tournaments were," said Izuku, doing his best not to wince at the scene before him. Both of his classmates showed how limited their fighting skills were, either lunging at each other, throwing wild punches, or in some sort of grappling that anyone with even a beginner level of skill could escape from. "Every summer since I was 4, I've had to spend time in America for, well, reasons. Actually, it was because of those trips that I was able to meet Pony." Kendo turned her head to Izuku, looking at him, and then Pony, her face showing that that statement had piqued her interest. "We were wondering about that," she said softly, Izuku barely able to make much out of her words. But rather than elaborating, Kendo turned her attention back to the fight. And when she spoke next, it was loud enough that it could be heard clearly. "Well, you chose a good master to learn from. It complements your quirk well. It kind of resembles Kamakiri's." "Ah, it's a little different," said Izuku as he glanced over at Kamakiri. The mantis-like boy was sitting there, his eyes training mostly on the fight in front of them. "Bone of my sword allows me control over my bones. I can increase their density, making them harder than steel if I wanted. But that's just the start, the bare bones if you will. With all my training, I can reshape any bone I want before pulling it out and then instantly regrowing it." A small chuckle then escaped Midoriya as he scratched his head, remembering the quirk had a less than friendly original name back when he first got it. He was thankful he was able to get the name changed. "Wait, does that mean you could?" Kendo's voice trailed off as she raised one of her bandaged hands. She then tapped the back of her fist before making a shink sound. Upon hearing it, both Izuku and Pony rolled their eyes. "Why does everyone always ask that?" asked Pony. At the same time, Izuku raised his head while lowering his head in defeat, while 3 bone claws exited from between his knuckles much like how a once famous Canadian hero used to back in his head. "That's pretty impressive, unlike this match," said Kendo, shaking her head as she turned to look back at her 2 classmates. "This is a little hard to watch, isn't it?" "It is," agreed Izuku. "And boring," added Pony, who was still talking in English as she looked at the sight before her with a dull expression. "Sucks that we had the best fight first." Izuku said nothing, silently agreeing with his crush as the 3 of them continued to watch everything play out before them. After a while, it seemed that even Ken realized this wasn't going to go anywhere anytime soon and ended the match. As Tetsu and Shishida separated, the 2 teens trained in martial arts gave one another a look. As if making a silent agreement, the pair stood and each approached one of the 2, with Midoriya heading over towards Tetsu. "What's up, Midoriya?" asked Tetsu, stretching his body and flexing as he prepared for round 2. "Come to wish me good luck before I clobber Harry over there with my awesome quirk." "Ah, well," began Izuku as the larger teen looked down at him, grinning ear to ear with those sharp fangs of his, giving the bone-wielding teen a moment of pause as he rethought how he was going to approach this. Unfortunately, this pause as well as Izuku looking away from Tetsu caused said teen's smile to fade. "You don't think my quirk is good enough to defeat him?" demanded Tetsu, activating his quirk and turning his body to steel. "Because let me tell you, it's dash." No, said Izuku quickly. "I just wanted to give you advice. You know, to put the odds more in your favor. Every little bit helps, right?" "Oh," was all Tetsu could say, his anger fading while his quirk swiftly deactivated. Well, thanks. But how can you help me? Well, when I watched your fight, I noticed that your stance was off, said Izuku quickly. The green-haired teen then spread his legs further apart, gesturing Tetsu to do the same. See, if you want to get the max power out of lunging attacks, you need to spread your legs apart like this. It'll help launch you forward with more force while also making it easier to brace yourself if your opponent attacks you first. Can you feel the difference? Yeah, a little, admitted Tetsu, moving around a little as he remained in the position. Wow, thanks for the help, man. Sadly, as much as Izuku wanted to give more help, Ken then signaled for the match to begin as well as telling Midoriya and Kendo to return to their seats. Once the match started, there was a significant improvement in the fighting between the hardening student and the Beastman. It was nothing jaw-dropping or anything that would bring them to a higher level of fighting prowess, but it did allow their attacks to give more of an impact. This continued for pretty much the rest of the lesson. Izuku and Kendo would watch their fellow classmates fight, gauging their skills before deciding what was the best quick advice they could give before their second. There were, of course, a few who didn't need it. Kaibara seemed to be a pretty aggressive fighter who had his own style, as did Kamakiri and Rin. But, overall, most people the pair talked to welcome the feedback. All the while, Ken watched with an approving smile. Then, when the last match was over, the blood-themed hero stood before the class with his arms crossed. "All right," he said in his gruff voice. "Can anyone tell me the purpose of this exercise? Why I had you fight the first round without quirks and the second with?" For a moment, nobody said anything until Pony raised her hand. "Yes, Senatori?" "Well, it's because," began Pony, speaking quickly in English only to stop when Izuku nudged her. It took a moment of her looking at him in confusion before she realized her blunder, taking a deep breath before speaking again. "It's because we can't just rely on our quirks to solve all our villain problems. We need to know how to fight them as well." Ken smiled, showing off his fangs as he did so. "That's absolutely correct," he said as he gave Pony a nod before turning to address the rest of the class. "There's a saying out there that I'm sure you've all heard. You can't be a one-trick pony. Well, that is even more important in this line of work. We deal with villains and natural disasters every day, most of them on the fly without understanding or getting an intel on the villain's quirks. If your quick is powerful enough, you can power through just about any untrained opponent. But what would happen if you went up against someone who has the perfect counter to your quirk? For example, Shiozaki. What would happen if you went up against someone with a fire quirk or an acid quirk? Would you pointlessly try to use your quirk, hoping you would get lucky? Or would you run away from the fight, forcing the civilians to fend for themselves?" "No, I wouldn't, I don't," stammered Shiozaki, a girl with hair that was made of thick, thorny vines running down her back. All eyes were on her at this moment, seeing the confusion and fear she held. Not surprising given how powerful her quirk was. Her fight against the welder aways had been over in an instant once she had been able to use her quirk, digging her vines into the ground before they erupted out and entangled the black-haired teen. She had left the ring with an air of confidence, but now that she was in the spot like this, forced to consider matchups that didn't favor her, she looked more than a little taken aback by their teacher's words. "Or, let's say you were put in a position where using your quirks would cause serious damage," continued Ken as he pointed at Fukudashi. "Let's say you use your comic quirk to create explosions while being underground. You could cause the streets, sidewalks, or whatever was above you to collapse, resulting in civilians getting hurt at best or crushed to death at worst. Not to mention what would happen to you. And let's not get into what would happen if there were pipes down there containing flammable gases and the like." Fukudashi's word balloon head made a gulping noise. "As such, knowing how to fight without your quirks places you a step above the rest," said Kansas, "and when you have a fighting style that best complements your quirk, well, that's what we like to call going plus ultra." Which was why I had Kendo and Midoriya facing off in the first round. I wanted all of you to get an idea of what you should all be striving for. Another smile then appeared on his face. And, while I never exactly planned on it, seeing them fight helped all of you to trust them when they offered advice. Well done, you two. As Izuku and Kendo blushed, Ken cleared his throat. "Okay, since we won't have time tomorrow, we'll be using the remainder of the class to decide our class representatives. Do we have any volunteers?" "That's obvious," yelled Aways. It's got to be the class's big brother and sister. Big brother and sister? Echoed Kendo as she looked at Aways as the rest of the class began to voice their agreement. And who are Dash? Before she could finish the sentence, both Izuku and Kendo felt hands being pressed against their shoulders, pushing them forward to the front of the class where they were then spun around to face them. Wait, you don't mean? Yelled Izuku, instantly catching on to what was going on. How are we the class big brother and sister? Added Kendo, who looked just as shocked and confused. Good. Looks like the class has decided, said Kan as he moved behind them, placing a hand on each of their shoulders. Let's make this quick. How many want Midoriya to be class rep? A loud amount of cheering echoed through the gym. Good, good. Now, how many want Kendo to be class rep? People cheered again, Izuku being able to pick up that it was somewhat louder than his. Very well then. Itsuka Kendo shall be the class rep, while Izuku Midoriya will be the vice rep. Chapter 5, Pony's Gallop. Summary. So, who did Midoriya switch places with? How does Pony feel about Izuku? How did our star couple react to the USJ incident? Well, the story's down there, so read it. Chapter text. A low moan escaped Pony's lips, nearly audible as the pounding of the water from her shower filled the small room. It was not the relaxing feeling of washing away the sweat or feeling the warm water relaxing her muscles that caused her to moan. Nor was it because the shower meant an end to her second day here at UA. No, it was because of Izuku. Pony had just come back from his room, spending the majority of their time together doing homework and hanging out. They had spent the entire evening sitting next to each other, their shoulders touching, arms occasionally gliding over the other when they both went to reach for the same thing. Sometimes, it hadn't been an accident as Pony had reached for the same thing when she noticed him doing it. Also that she could feel his skin against hers, just like that day on the beach. Just like when they had been on her bed, watching animes together. And yet she wanted more. Now that the day was over, Pony was in her shower filled with a desire that had been growing more and more over the years. As the water cascaded down her body, one of her hands snaked its way down to her pussy to help relieve her. Her first moan of the night had been when she had first made contact with her lower lips, but new moans quickly arose as her imagination went to work. In her mind, she was back on that beach with Izuku. Both had just come out of the water in a more secluded section of the beach, the water still damp and clinging to their bodies. Her back was pressed against his firm chest, his arms snaked around her body, and it was his hand that was playing with her. That detail brought forth a new level of wetness, her hips nearly bucking forward at the thought of those hands which were so skilled with blades could be skilled at pleasuring her. Izuku, she moaned, tilting her head up as far as her horns would allow against the shower wall. Her legs trembled a bit as she slid her fingers inside her, imagining it was her green-haired imaginary lover doing it. She moaned as her two fingers curled inside her, hitting those sweet spots while her thumb moved in a circular motion around her clit. Then a stray thought caused her to moan a bit higher. Would do the same to her asshole? Oh God, had she seen too many hentai? She had no idea if he was even into something like that, and it would be so bold of him. Yet Pony could not deny that she had always wondered what it would be like to have her backdoor played with, to have fingers and toys penetrated, to have it cleaned before receiving a rim job, to have it pounded like in those hentai. Maybe if it were Izuku, it would feel as amazing as it looked in those pornos. As her fingers played with her sex, Pony's other hand was at work. Again, imagining that it was Izuku's, it started from her hip and began sliding upwards along her body. Once it was high enough, the hand reached for her breast. Pony knew she wasn't the most well-endowed in her class, smaller than Tokage and Kendo's breasts. But that didn't mean she wasn't ashamed of them either. Firm, perky breasts that could fill the palms of her hand, and then some. They fitted her figure nicely in her opinion, as well as many of her classmates back in America. She just hoped that Izuku would like them as well. Licking her lips, Pony began to grope herself. She leaned harder against the shower wall, breath coming out in pants as she thought of Izuku's hands doing this to her. Imagine that they were the ones squeezing her flesh while whispering how good it felt into her ear. Imagine that it was his fingers tracing and flicking her now rock-hard nipples. That he was whispering to her that he didn't care if they got caught, nor did he want to pause just so they could get a room. He had waited long enough, twisting her nipple hard as he told her that. She had waited long enough. They were going to. A cry rang out as Pony came, hard. Her juices seemed to explode from between her legs, landing on the floor before being swept down the drain. Her legs shook slightly, pressing herself even harder against the shower wall to keep herself standing as she panted. Izuku, she moaned, a small smile appearing on her lips. HR. This sucks, cried Tetsu as he slammed his tray of food next to Izuku. Sitting around them were Awaze, Kawaro, and Shishida, all of them jumping slightly by the sudden noise. Yet, none of them chastised him. All of them knew what he was talking about. Today, on their third day here at UA, was supposed to be their first hero lesson with the living legend himself, All Might. So many hours wondering what he would teach them, what he would show them. This had only been amplified when they had heard rumors that All Might had started 1A on 2 versus 2 battle trails with indoor combat in one of the false cities that was on campus. But that excitement turned into outrage when they got the news. All Might wasn't on campus today. He had canceled. Damn it. How come All Might teaches those guys in Class 1A, but not us? What makes them so special? Demanded Tetsu as he violently gripped his fork before stabbing it into his meal. It does feel like we have been slighted, said Shishida with a nod, eating his food more slowly. He was on the schedule. I'm sure he would have been here if he could, said Izuku, quickly coming to his idol's defense. I mean, this morning he stopped 4 villain attacks before I finished breakfast. So maybe something else came up. Yeah, well, what's so important that he couldn't let the other heroes take over? Demanded Tetsu, though some of the bite in his tone had vanished. Could have been something that the other heroes couldn't handle on their own, mused Kawaro. Perhaps a villain with a powerful quirk, or there were so many crimes taking place that they needed the extra help. Izuku nodded, thankful towards the dark-skinned classmate. People's lives are worth him skipping one lesson. I'm sure that tonight we'll hear all about it on the news. And I'm sure he'll make it up to us next time. Well, before we get to that, began Shishida as he looked over at Izuku. Have you and Kendo heard what we will be doing this afternoon? Izuku nodded. Ken-sensei is going to be taking over the class. I think he's going to talk to Class 1 as homeroom teacher to find out exactly what All Might did with them, so we won't be left behind. Shishida let out a sigh before nodding. Well, at least that's something. Still, said Tetsu, a frown on his face as he looked down at his food, it won't be the same. At that, none of the others could say anything as they sat there in a silent agreement. HR. Meanwhile, as Pony was walking away from lunch rush with her meal in her hands, she found one of her elbows locked with another's. Before she could look and see the long, mossy green hair and the fanged teeth of Tokage, Pony found herself being pulled over to a table next to Izuku's. The blonde didn't put up too much of a fight, more out of curiosity than anything else. When they arrived at the table, Pony saw that it was full of her other female classmates. Kendo was seated next to the silver-haired poltergeist Yanagi, the fist-enlarging girl gesturing for Pony to take the seat opposite of her. Wordlessly, Pony set down her tray before taking a seat herself where the mushroom girl Komori was to her left. On the opposite side of the table was the raven-haired Kodai who sat there, her head resting on a single fist as she kept her neutral gaze upon Pony while Tokage jumped into the seat next to her. Finally, there was Shiozaki who was sitting 2 seats off to the side, away from Tokage. So, began Pony slowly as she picked up her fork to eat some of her warm, cinnamon-covered apple slices. What's all this about? Well, began Tokage, drawing out the word in a sing-song-like manner as her grin grew. The way she spoke, it made Pony wonder if she were the ringleader of this little group. Not that she minded, taking a bit out of her food. We were just wondering how things were going between you and Midoriya. I mean, you are the class couple after all. Pony's eyes went wide as she suddenly spat out her food, thousands of tiny bits of apple and gunk flying right into the body splitter's face, as well as Kodai's. Kodai, who had the quirk that allowed her to enlarge or shrink things, looked annoyed as she wiped her face away. As for the rest, they watched as Pony gagged and struggled to breathe, eventually grabbing her glass of apple cider before downing half of it. What? Pony half shouted, almost slamming her glass on the table while her cheeks burned bright red. Me and Izuku? He and I? Well, that's just, we're not. Oh, said Komori, her face down, allowing the bangs of her hair to shield her eyes from the group. I guess that means you two aren't together. Still blushing, Pony scratched the side of her face. Ah, no. No, we aren't. She then blinked before continuing a bit slower. I mean, we're together, but not in any special way. Just, friends. What made all of you think that anyways? I don't know, said Tokage in her sing-song voice again as she picked up a dino-shaped chicken nugget before biting off its head. Maybe it's because of that little dance the two of you gave the class on day one. Or perhaps it's because you two are always coming in together, talking about whatever. That and you two are nearly joined at the hip. The way you two look at each other. And let's not forget the fact that, according to Kendo, you two have spent a lot of time together over the years. Pony turned to look at Kendo who, at least, gave her an apologetic look. Sorry, but neither of you told me to keep it a secret. It's fine, said Pony slowly, glancing away from the table as she said this. The horn girl then took a deep breath before turning her attention back towards the assembled girls of Class 1B. Look, me and Izuku are just friends. We've known each other since we were like 4. Our families are close, and whenever he visited me in the States, well, he stayed with us. And we hung out. A lot. So yeah, that's it. Oh, asked Tokage, her grin widening, so that Pony thought she could see all of her classmates' fangs. Well, if you're just friends, got any tips on asking him out? At that, Pony's face began to glow a bright red while her pupil shrank into nothing larger than a grain of sand. Her heart began to pound so loudly she could hear it in her ear. What? Was all the American girl could say. Hey, he's on the market, said Tokage as she turned around in an exaggerated motion, kicking her legs forward as she did before jumping up. A catch like that won't stay single for long. I want to get, while the getting's good. Pony found herself standing before she even realized she had done so. Why you can't, she said, her cheeks burning even more now. Her heart was pounding even faster, fingers trembling on her now outstretched hand as she watched Tokage turn while placing her hands on her hips. With that smile on her face, Pony knew that Tokage could have any guy she wanted. She had the looks, the charm, the outgoing personality to make any guy she wanted fall head over heels for her. Is there a reason for her not to try? Asked Shiozaki, who up until this point had been silent as she ate her meal with her eyes closed. But now her eyes opened, looking over at Pony without turning her head. You said that you have not professed any feelings towards Midoriya. As a friend of his, should it not be your wish for him to find happiness as he moves into adulthood? To find the love that he can only ever experience from another? Well, began Pony. She's got a point, said Yanagi. Why not dash? Because I like him, said Pony quickly, interrupting the girl as she slumped back into her seat. Because I like him more than a friend. I want to be more than just his childhood friend, all right. More than his best friend. I just haven't told him yet. Pony kept her head down, feeling like at any moment she would start crying. Oh God, why was this happening to her? Now everyone in class would start thinking the worst about her. That she was a scaredy cat of a girl. That there was no way she could pull her weight around class or have what it took to fight villains when she couldn't even tell Izuku how she felt. That or she was just selfish or something. But before the waterworks could truly begin to flow, Pony felt something on her back and shoulder. Looking up, she saw that Kendo was leaning close to her with a hand on her back and a gentle smile on her face. As Pony blinked, she noticed that that wasn't the only hand on her. Out of the corner of her eye, the blonde could see a severed hand on her shoulder. If she hadn't seen Tokage using her quirk before, Pony would have let out a scream that would have been heard all over the school, perhaps the entire city. Turning her head around, Pony saw that all the other girls were looking at her with friendly expressions. Tokage had sat back down, grinning ear to ear without showing her teeth, while Kodai was sitting upright with both her hands on the table. Shiozaki had stopped eating, turning to give Pony her full attention. Komori and Yanagi had also turned to look at her. Sorry about that, muttered Pony as she wiped away one of the tears half formed in her eye. No problems, replied Tokage with a wave of her handless arm. It was never our intention to cause you undue distress, said Yanagi. We only wished to know the truth behind your relationship with Midoriya. She then glanced over at Tokage. But then someone had to go off script. Come on, cried Tokage as the rest of the girls turned to look at her. Like anyone here was buying that whole, "we're just really good friends" bit. We've all seen the looks that they have been giving each other since day one. And the way I figured it, it was a win-win. Either she admits that she has feelings for the other green-haired badass in the class, or I get a date. She paused as everyone stared at her, their eyes unblinking. What? I wasn't lying when I said Midoriya is a fine catch. Dude's hot and has amazing muscles. Not too bulky like some guys around here, but nice and lean. As one, all the girls sighed as Tokage's hand returned to her. So, is there any reason why you haven't told him how you feel? Asked Komori. Pony gave her a look before sighing. Well, to be honest, I feel like I'm in this weird spot right now, admitted Pony, the others at the table leaning forward so as to not miss a word. Tokage even detached her ear, having it float closer to Pony. Like I said, we've been friends forever now, and as much as I want to be more than that, a lot has already changed for me. I mean, I'm in a different country and boarding here at school. I'm still getting used to a new language, new school, new foods, and everything. Right now, Izuku's the one thing that's familiar around here. And I don't want to ruin it or make things awkward between us right now. So you plan on telling him? Asked Yanagi, her eyes widening ever so slightly. To that, Pony gave a nod as her blush returned slightly. That's great, Pony, said Kendo, flashing her a dazzling smile. And don't worry about us. We promise that none of us will make a move on Izuku until you're ready to talk to him. We'll even be there to help you when the time comes. After all, you two are already the class couple, added Kodai with a small smile. But please do not take this time for granted, said Shiozaki in a stern tone. As beings who have been granted God's greatest gift to mankind, free will, we can only claim control over our own actions. The rest of the school, however, has made no such vow, nor shall they care if they trample over your heart. The vine-haired girl then lowered her head. You should also remember what path we have chosen. While it is a virtuous path, it is also one that holds many hurdles and dangers. Time may not be in abundance. Before Pony could say anything, a loud commotion rocked the lunchroom, causing them all to suddenly stand. HR. Well, look who we have here. Why, if it isn't the vastly inferior members of Class 1B. Izuku, who was in mid-bite of his food, turned his eyes to look at who was speaking. It was a boy around their own age, his blonde hair slightly unkempt as he looked down at the table with a look of utter superiority. I heard that All Might bailed on you, continued the teen, his tone smug as all hell. Such a shame. Such a shame. But, then again, you really can't blame him. Clearly, he sees that we of Class 1A are the superior class with the superior quirks. The rest of you are nothing more than side characters to get shoved to the side. As the boy smiled, placing a hand on their table and leaning onto it, Izuku glanced around at his classmates. Most of them had their heads down, hands gripped into tight fists as they fought hard to ignore the blonde speaking. Well, most of them were. You want to repeat that? Demanded Tetsu as he stood, eyes filled with rage as he looked at the blonde with hate. Oh, is there a problem with your ears? Laughed the blonde as his eyes slightly narrowed. Tetsu. I said we are the superior class in every way. Our teacher, Aizawa-sensei, had us doing a test to fully demonstrate to him that we were worthy enough to be here. What's more, our class's recommendation students are leagues above yours. One has the power over creation itself, while the other is the son of the number 2 hero with power over fire and ice. Far superior to a girl who can break apart her own body and one that just makes things soft. The blonde took a moment to laugh as Tetsu began to grind his teeth. And to top it all off, our class houses the student who scored the highest on the entrance exam. It's no wonder why someone like All Might would devote his time to us. More laughter exploded from the blonde, causing a larger scene. Amongst those at his table, he could see several of them beginning to stand as they looked at the teen in contempt. Some, like Shishida, looked ready to activate their quirks to silence this teen. Izuku also noticed that those sitting at the girls' table were approaching, as were a few from Class 1A. Whether they were there as backup for this guy, or coming to reprimand him, was anyone's guess. Monoma, said a red-haired teen as he approached. I think you're going a little too far. TCH, He shouldn't be wasting his breath with these extras, said an ashen-haired teen who walked towards them, hands in his pockets, while giving off a vibe that felt familiar to Izuku for some reason. But, regardless, his comment only served to make the others even angrier. "Who are you to be calling us extras?" demanded Kurwaro, his eyes narrowing dangerously. "Who is he?" said the one now known as Monoma in a mocking tone. "This just happens to be one of our class stars, Bakugo. You may have heard about him as the one who got the top score in the entrance exam. Another reason why Class 1A is the superior class." "Yeah," added a small boy who seemed to bounce on the table. The boy's appearance was odd as he seemed to have large purple balls in place of hair. As Izuku looked at him, wondering if the local grade school was missing a child, the boy spoke once more with a lecherous look as his gaze fell on the girls of Class 1B. "Know what else? We also have like the most smokin' hot babes." "That's IT," yelled Tetsu. The teen pulled back his fist, ready to throw the first punch, while those in Class 1A got ready to defend their bragging classmate and the short pervert. The red-haired teen held up his arms in a defensive manner while Bakugo pulled out one of his hands and held it upright to show off several small pops that sent another shiver down Izuku's spine for some reason. Deciding that things had gone on long enough, Izuku took action. The green-haired teen stood, turning around just in time to see Tetsu swinging his fist forward and aiming it at Monoma. Seeing this, the bragging teen dropped his smug smile as he now looked terrified at getting hurt. But the blow never came as Izuku gripped onto the wrist of the taller teen, stopping the attack in its tracks. "That's enough," said Izuku in a stern tone as other students from the 1A tables approached. Rather than look at them, Izuku kept his eyes on his friend. "Just take a breath. They're not worth getting in trouble for." At first, Tetsu just gritted his teeth as he looked at his target. Said boy had taken a step or 5 backwards, looking like he was ready to flee. Perhaps seeing this aided in Tetsu's anger ebbing as he nodded. "Yeah, sorry about that, Vice Rep," said Tetsu as his arms fell to his side. Nodding, Izuku turned to look at those from Class 1A. "I am very sorry about that," he said in a pleasant tone. "Now, let's all take a breath and calm down. We are on the same side." "Who the fuck are you, extra?" demanded Bakugo as he gave Izuku a once-over. "I am the Vice Rep of Class 1B, Izuku Midoriya," replied the green-haired teen. For a moment, the ashen blonde just stared at him. It was clear he was thinking about something. And so was Izuku. He stared at the other teen as he seemed familiar for some reason. But where? No one he knew back home had gotten into UA. So where did he? "Midoriya, huh?" said Bakugo at last, a dark smile appearing on his face. "I remember you. You're the guy who came in second place on the practical. But you only passed because you saved those worthless extras that were stuck in that building." Izuku's eyes widened as he heard that. "How did you know about that?" he demanded, feeling his bones already becoming harder with each word he spoke. "Because, apparently, those shitty hero wannabes were stuck there because they weren't powerful enough to get out of the mess I made in that fake office," said Bakugo with something that sickened Izuku. Pride. "Got chewed over slightly by All Might in my acceptance letter, but who cares? If they were weak and stupid enough to get trapped like that, then they deserved it." Izuku felt his blood boiling at that. This utter asshole had the gall to say that. Had he not seen the footage of those people, the fear etched onto their faces as they scrambled around to try and save themselves? Had he not been haunted by the thought that if anything had gone wrong, they could have all been killed? What was this school thinking letting someone like him in and awarding him full points? For a moment, Izuku narrowed his gaze while his eyes hardened to glare at Bakugo. As the two stood there, the rest of Class 1B began to get behind Izuku save for one. Pony stepped forward and stood by his side as the two glared at the ashen blonde who gave them all a smile while pulling out both his hands. There was a look in his eyes that screamed if it was a fight they wanted, he would be more than happy to give it to them. Then, before things could get any more heated, the alarm went off. HR. The next night found Pony laying alone in her bed, staring up at the ceiling with a somewhat blank look on her face. Dressed for bed, a top that only went down far enough to cover her cleavage and short shorts, the horned girl had a hand over her heart as she thought about the panic that had occurred. There was still so much she and the rest of her class didn't know. One moment, They were all in the locker room to get ready for a hero lesson with the topic of what 1A was doing being on everyone's minds. They had all heard from Kendo and Izuku that their rival class was going on a trip to the USJ with All Might being one of the teachers there. This had naturally gotten on several of her classmates, some of them having very loud conversations that could be heard in both locker rooms. For her part, Pony had to agree that it was unfair that All Might hadn't taught them anything. But that was as far as she and Izuku would have gone, as Izuku, who had heard about the trip from Kan, knew that these sorts of trips were planned well in advance. So, basically, All Might was just trying to get back on his schedule. It just sucked that now they would have to listen to more of Class 1, as bragging. And if he canceled on them again. As the students began making their way out of the locker rooms, chaos erupted. No one knew what was going on as Nizu called all the teachers to the front of the school, telling the students to go back to their homerooms until they were given permission to leave. So, Class 1B had to get back into their normal school uniforms and head back to class, where they waited for 4 hours. For hours of doing nothing but wondering what the heck was going on. Then, when Ken came back, they found out the truth. There had been a villain attack on the USJ. Hundreds of villains had emerged there with the intent to kill All Might as well as the other students there. And from there, Pony tuned everything else out. She didn't hear how many students got hurt, how the villains were defeated, or anything else. All she knew was that there had been a villain attack here at UA. From that point until she got back to her room, Pony's body seemed to move on autopilot as she went through the motions of her everyday life. It was only now, with the moon high in the night sky, that her mind began to have any real focus. Perhaps it was selfish, even childish, of her to worry about her love life while hearing that others had been hurt. But she couldn't help it. She had thought that she was safe here, at the top hero school, and All Might being a teacher. That she wouldn't have to deal with real villains until she was a pro or, at the very least, when she did her internships. She thought she had plenty of time to tell Izuku how she felt, but after hearing that from Kan, a serious look appeared in Pony's eyes as she got up off the bed and headed towards the door. Her heart pounded as she opened it, and her brain told her to turn around as she exited the room. It tried hard to convince her to stop this, that she was overreacting to a one-time event. But Pony, she was done waiting. She loved Izuku and had loved him for a while now. So, she was going to tell him in the most direct manner she could. Once she was at his door, Pony knocked several times. As she waited, Pony could hear everything that was going on inside. The rustling of sheets, the heavy footsteps leading towards the door, and Izuku's muffled voice as he drew closer. "Who is Dash?" began Izuku, rubbing the sleep from his eyes as he opened the door only to stop when he saw who it was. "Pony, is everything okay? Do you need Dash again?" Izuku's sentence was cut off, though this time it was because Pony had closed the gap between them to press her lips against his own. They stayed like that for a moment, Pony feeling the warm air coming out of his nose as his body went from rigid to loose. How long it lasted, neither of them knew. All that Pony was aware of was that when they separated, there was a long strand of saliva that still connected them while they panted. They did not remain separated for long as Izuku closed the gap between them. Pony moaned into another kiss as their bodies seemed to move on their own. One of Izuku's hands went to caress her face while the other wrapped around her slender waist, keeping their bodies as close as possible. Bliss filled her mind as Pony melted more into the embrace, her arms wrapping around her Izuku's neck. Heat began to pour throughout her body as his fingertips began to move and press along her spine, while her own did the same with his messy green locks. At some point, Izuku's hand snaked its way to the back of her head, pressing it towards him in order to deepen the kiss. Their tongues were now getting involved, sliding into each other's mouths. Each one poked at the other's teeth and gums before sliding over to slide against the roof of the other's mouth. And the further they went, the more they felt the other grinding into the other as they swiftly began getting the hang of making out. Oh God, was she getting dizzy from what he was making her feel, or was that a lack of oxygen? Both? Who cared? All Pony knew was she didn't want this to end. Fireworks, bells, and whistles were going off through her brain every second. The heat they were feeling making Pony want more. And it seemed like Izuku wanted the same as he. While taking a few rapid breathes through his nose, suddenly lifted the American girl off her hooves while still maintaining the kiss. In response, Pony wrapped her legs around his waist as best she could, both her hands running through his hair as she deepened the kiss. She began to nip at his lips as she felt them moving into the room, the sound of Izuku kicking it close barely registering with her. Neither of the two separated, with Pony only vaguely aware that she was wobbling back and forth in the dark room. Then, the next thing she knew, the two had fallen onto the bed. As soon as she made contact with the sheets, their cool touch seemed to jolt Pony back into her senses. Separating from Izuku, the two began to take deep breaths as they looked into each other's eyes. She could see disbelief in those emerald orbs as they gazed back at her, as if Izuku wasn't sure if this were a dream or reality. But, at the same time, she could see an excitement that mirrored her own. Then, Izuku went down for another kiss. Pushing her down, Pony soon felt his hands on her sides moving upwards. As soon as they were high enough, they took hold of the hem of her top, pushing it upwards so that her bare breasts were pressed against his shirt. All Pony could do was moan louder, so turned on by this more aggressive Izuku. For a moment they separated again so that her top could be pulled over her head and then tossed to the side. With that out of the way, Izuku's lips began to move away from her lips. While his fingers ran up and down her sides, Izuku began to plant many soft kisses at her jaw and then going down her neck. Her breathing hitched with each touch before being followed by many aroused sighs, grunts, and moans whose only interruption was caused when Pony's tongue darted out of her mouth to lick the side of her beloved's face. This only seemed to make him more aggressive in his actions, low growls from him filling the room as he doubled his efforts. Yes, yes. Oh my God, right there. Oh God, Izuku. Right? Oh yes, just a little more. Just a little more. Pony felt their hips moving, grinding against each other as they continued, her hands moving to grab his nightshirt. Once more they separated, their lower bodies never ceasing in their movements as she nearly ripped the shirt off of him. As soon as it was over, he was on top of her again, gaining squeals of delight as he found a sensitive spot on her neck. The feeling caused her eyes to roll back into her skull, legs quivering and nearly melting away as he applied suction to it. She didn't care if she had the world's biggest hickey in the morning, for she would wear it with pride. Things continued to escalate, sweat beginning to glisten off their bodies as the heat of the room began to intensify for the two topless teens. Rational thought was a distant memory as Izuku began to make his way down her neck, planting kisses and dragging his tongue against her skin. Each moment nearly made the horned girl melt into a puddle of bliss. Then, when he got to her breasts, the blonde girl let out a cry as Izuku began to lick and suckle at her hard nubs while his other hand went to fondle her other breast briefly. Then, she felt his hand going down to her short shorts, pulling it down as he continued to. Izuku, stop, yelled Pony as she came down instantly from her high. Thankfully, Izuku didn't need to be told twice as he nearly jumped off her with a look of horror in his eyes. Did I hurt you? He asked, fear now dripping in his voice while his body shook. No, I just think we needed to pause for a moment before we go too far, said Pony. Seeing his eyes brighten in relief, even in the darkness, Pony reached forward to pull him back onto her. Not how I thought this was going to go. I just wanted to say that I didn't want to wait any longer to tell you this. Something I should have said a while ago. Izuku, I love you. In response, Izuku held her tight. I love you too. Chapter 6. The next day. Summary. Izuku and Pony get to talking and find some boundaries. Now, will they get to do some rescue training? And what's this? Momo? Chapter text. Izuku laid in his bed, arms wrapped around Pony's waist as he looked down past her horns and into her golden locks. A breath escaped his lips as Izuku felt Pony's lips lightly kissing him as her head was nestled in the nape of his neck. He could feel her bare chest pressing into his own, her hardened nipples pressing against his skin while her fingers traced circles upon his pecs. He could smell the scent of sweat on her as well as something else, both so intoxicating right now that it made him long for this moment never to end. There was a part of him that still couldn't believe this was happening. Not too long again he had been laying alone in bed, slowly falling asleep, when a knock came to his door. It had been Pony. She had kissed him, their lips meeting for the first time in a way that Izuku had longed for. From there, his body seemed to go into autopilot, savoring the taste of the girl he loved and cared for. Her mews, moans, and cries were all music to his ears, urging him to continue. And he didn't want to disappoint. Not now, when the moment he had dreamed of was finally coming true. It had only been when he had asked him to stop did the world return. Honestly, he was glad she had done that. As much as a part of him wanted to continue, Izuku wanted to be in control when they reached that part, so that neither of them had any regrets that could have been laid in the heat of the moment. "So," said Izuku finally, his words reaching Pony, who laid her head on his shoulder. "So," she echoed, a smile on her face as her blue eyes stared into his emerald ones. "How long?" he asked while one of his hands slid down her back, tracing her spine until his fingers met her shorts. "At the beach," admitted Pony. "I think that's when it started. It's kind of weird. I'd seen you plenty of times before without a shirt on. But, somehow, when we were out there in the water, it was like I was seeing a different side of you for the first time. When you left, well, I was sort of in a funk. For some reason, I just missed you more than I normally did. Sure, we could chat in the morning like we normally do, but it just wasn't enough. You know? Then, I started to have these dreams." At that, Pony blushed brighter. At first, I couldn't remember what they were about. All I knew was that, when I woke up, I was drenched in sweat. And I was horny. I mean, like super extra deluxe horny. I started spacing out in the middle of conversations, thinking about making out with a guy whose face I couldn't see, or having his face between my legs and other stuff. It's kind of embarrassing how bad some of them got. I mean, I could play off missing the waitress asking me for my order or bumping into a wall. Others, not so much. Like this one time, I was so lost in those fantasies that I wandered about 1.5 miles from my parents' home. Well, eventually my friends figured something was going on and decided to get to the bottom of it by having a slumber party. And that's when I met Sarah. "Sarah?" echoed Izuku. While he questioned how a slumber party would help, his mind shifted through all the people that Pony considered her friends. He thought he knew them all, but none of them were named. Wait a moment. That girl he saw in the chat. The ditzy-looking girl with the purple tail with a spade at the end. If he remembered correctly, Pony called her Sarah. "Yeah," said Pony with a nod. Apparently Jazz knew her from one of her dance classes and invited her over. Turns out that tail of hers is a part of her quirk, succubus. By placing it on the forehead of someone sleeping, she can see what they are dreaming. Thankfully, that's all she can do right now. Pony then shuddered. I'd hate to think what that girl could do if she could interact or change what someone is dreaming about. It was bad enough when she blurted out to everyone that I was having sex dreams with you. At that, Izuku's eyes widened as a blush appeared on his face. "Oh," was all he could say. "After that, we all had a heart-to-heart," said Pony. "It helped me sort out why I was feeling this way. Everyone gave me advice, like dating other people to see if what I had was just a crush or lust or whatever. I tried it, like, twice. They were sort of okay, but I kept comparing them to you. That's how I came to realize that I was hopelessly in love with you." A frown then appeared on her face. "And then I came to realize that I needed a lock on my door. Sarah has no concept of knocking before entering." "Okay," was all Izuku could say. "If it makes you feel better, I've gotten lost in a couple fantasies involving you as well." "I'd be upset if you didn't," grinned Pony as she kissed his neck. "Especially after that makeout session. So what about you? How did you come to realize that you had feelings for me?" So Izuku told her the truth. Sadly, there was not much to tell. He had found her beautiful for so long, loved being with her, that his trips to America were always the highlight of the year. Then, at the beach, those feelings were put into overdrive. That had been when the fantasies had begun, a primal force within him stirring whenever he thought about her. How he would fantasize about having her walking into his room, wearing nothing but her bikini, and sitting on his lap. And how it all came together when he came over for the exam. Seeing her here, in Japan, just made it all click into place. "So," said Izuku after he finished. "What happens next?" Pony let out a hum, her fingers drumming against his chest as she did so. "Well, I think we should just go at our own pace and not rush things. You know, just go with the flow we are more comfortable with." Izuku nodded. "That sounds good. So, is this where we're at for now?" Pony looked like she was thinking about that for a good minute or so, before a grin appeared on her face. She then pulled away from Izuku, much as he didn't want her to, and stood up next to the bed with her back facing him. Izuku then watched as Pony's hands went to her shorts, her fingers wrapping themselves around the hem of the material. Before he could say or do anything, Pony bent down, thrusting her lovely and now bare ass towards him as she pulled down her shorts. Her tail swished slightly, as if fanning a scent towards his nose that brought forth desires before she turned around. Izuku's breath got caught in his thought as he looked at Pony, not a shred of clothing to obscure the perfection that was her body. Even in the low light of his room, Izuku could see every curve on her being. While she didn't have porn star level breasts like Midnight, MT Lady, or that one girl he saw in Class 1A with the black ponytail, her breasts looked amazing on her. Just large enough to fit in the palm of his hand without any sag, with large rosy nipples that stood at attention. He had always known just how firm and slim her stomach was, but somehow it appeared more tantalizing to him. Her hips were on full display, and her pussy was just wow. It looked like she shaved it daily, completely bare, and her slit was almost dripping with her nectar. "Like what you see?" she asked, raising her arms and placing her hands behind her head before giving her hips a little roll. The green-haired teen's mouth had gone dry, making it difficult to say the word yes. So, instead, he just nodded. "Good," was her reply as Pony moved to the foot of the bed. There, Pony lowered herself so that the palms of her hands pressed into the mattress next to Izuku's legs. With her eyes locked onto his own, Pony moved forward a bit while swaying her body and licking her lips. All Izuku could do at that moment was to stare and wonder what she was up to, something that he didn't need to wait long to find out as, when she was close enough, Pony reached forward to grab his own shorts and pull them. Izuku's eyes widened as his cock sprang to life once freed of what had been confining it, while Pony blushed at seeing it in person. Yet that didn't stop her from taking off the last stitch of clothing on him before tossing it away. "Too much?" she asked, moving her body again so that she was half laying on her boyfriend's body. Her arms were wrapped around his upper torso, while both her legs wrapped around one of his own. Izuku could feel her bare pussy pressing against his hips, causing his cock to grow harder. "Is this as far as we're going to go?" asked Izuku, wanting to make sure of Pony's intent. The blonde girl just nodded. "Sleeping together naked, and maybe some light petting," she replied as one of her hands reached down towards his cock. Izuku opened his mouth to say something, but was cut short when he felt her fingers running along the skin of his member. The touch was soft, feeling more like she was tracing it. And when he felt her touch moving towards the head, running circles along the base, his toes curled. As his breathing quickened, Pony moved slightly so that her mouth was closer to his ear. "You can touch me as well. I want you to." A shudder went through Izuku's body as he felt her breath against his ear. But that didn't stop him from doing as she said. His hands went down her back, stopping at her ass. He then gave both buns a squeeze, amazed by how soft yet firm they were. Another squeeze soon followed, his fingers moving into the crack that separated them and pulling at them. Now it was Pony's turn to let out a pleasurable moan, her pussy growing moist. For a while, it continued like this. The point was never about making the other come, but just to touch those areas that had been forbidden for so long, to grow more used to their new lover's body until, finally, sleep found them. HR. It was the sound of his phone's alarm that woke Izuku up with a jerk. For a moment, he felt slightly disoriented, wondering why he was naked. But the moment passed quickly as he saw the face of Pony, her eyes struggling to stay closed and keep her in the realm of sleep, right in front of him. He knew he was laying on his side, his hands still on the girl's as to keep her body close while the covers covered their bodies. He could feel her own hands on his sides, pressing her chest into his own. Eventually, Izuku had to reach over his girlfriend to get to the alarm, waking her up in the process. With a groan, Pony opened her large, blue eyes with a frown which soon turned into a smile as she saw Izuku's own smile. "Morning," she murmured before pushing herself forward to plant a quick kiss on his lips. "Morning," he repeated before doing the same. Like that they stayed, basking in the presence of the other as the sunlight shined down upon them. It was almost perfection. However, the real world quickly intruded upon them. From just beyond Izuku's door, noises began to spring up, causing both of their eyes to widen in realization. Those noises quickly grew as more and more people began moving through the hallways. Students heading out for breakfast, To get some early morning training in, or just heading to class? Shit. The two teens swore at the same time as they scrambled to get up. Once on their feet, Izuku looked himself and Pony over, causing even more panic to sink in. He could see that some of Pony's long hair was matted in various patches, and reaching up to feel his own told him it was the same. Now he could feel just how grimy his skin felt, no doubt also smelling slightly. All of this could be taken care of with a shower, but… crap, moaned Pony as she searched the small room for her clothing. I can't go out there looking like this. Not with all those people out there. It's okay, said Izuku, quickly grabbing her shoulders as his mind rushed to make a plan. We'll do it like this. I'll take a quick shower before heading out. Then you take one, and, hopefully, by the time you get out the halls will be empty. Yeah, we have that rescue class at the USJ today, said Pony, her eyes darting from Izuku to the door, as if she half expected someone to knock it down at any moment. What if someone notices that I'm using your body wash or something? Then just tell them you ran out of your own and asked me for some, said Izuku quickly. Yeah, that'll work. We live on the same floor, and everyone knows we know each other, so that won't seem so weird. Right, said Pony with a nod, her body and face relaxing a bit as Izuku kissed her cheek before heading for the bathroom. Once the door was closed, Izuku made his way to the shower and turned it on. Even with the water running, steam filling the bathroom, he could still hear what Pony said next. I'll bring a spare uniform to your room from now on. Then maybe we could shower together every morning. Hearing that, Izuku turned the shower knob to cold before stepping in. Excuse me, are you Izuku Midoriya? Startled by the sudden voice coming behind him, Izuku nearly dropped the 2 apple turnovers he had gotten for Pony. Cursing his nerves and hoping they hadn't been found out, he turned to see a tall figure standing behind him in the hallway leading to the heroics course. Of course, it didn't take him long to recognize her as a member of Class 1A. He had seen her long, dark ponytail a few times already in the library and the lunchroom while she sat with her classmates. And, well, there was no one else in their grade with breasts that large. Yes, he replied, trying to stay calm. Pardon me, we haven't been properly introduced yet. My name is myheroacademia, the class representative of your sister class, said the girl in a pleasant enough tone as she placed a hand over her heart. Oh, said Izuku, taking a small step back as he gave the taller girl a polite bow of respect. However, as he did this, he had to wonder what was going on. Judging by the fact that she knew his name, she had been clearly seeking him out. Yet why him and not Kendo? The orange-haired girl was the class rep of 1B after all, so it made more sense to talk to her about official class rep business. But, rather than ask about that, Izuku decided to ask something a bit more pressing. How is your class holding up? I heard that no one was seriously hurt yesterday, besides your teacher and 13. When I saw them last night, they were fine, said Yaoyorozu with a bit of a smile. Most were shaken and Mineta needs to get his diaper. His hero costume cleaned, but other than a few minor injuries, none of my classmates were seriously injured. We were lucky that All Might showed up in time to save us. A slight smile appeared on Izuku's face, nodding as he heard that. He had heard a bit about what had happened, but nothing official. Just the stories that had been posted to his favorite hero sites. A part of him felt more than a little envious of Class 1A since, despite the danger they were in, they not only got to train with his all-time favorite hero, but got to see him fight a powerful villain. It was something that Izuku had only ever seen in the online videos. Well, while it wouldn't be the same, perhaps All Might could tell his class the full story. After all, given what happened at the USJ, Izuku was nearly positive that they wouldn't be doing that today. And while that sucked, he had heard in the lunchroom that All Might was on campus today meeting with the rest of the school staff and the police, meaning he was sure to do something with them. Yet, as Izuku stood there, a lingering negative thought began to worm its way into his head. If it had been Class 1B who had been in danger, would All Might have been there to save them? The rational part of his mind screamed yes. Of course, All Might would be there. Yet there was a softer, darker voice that questioned that. Then, Yaoyorozu's smile vanished. With that said, the danger we were in was real, she continued to say. Had things gone differently, I might not have been able to fulfill one of the duties of my station which I neglected. Meaning? Asked Izuku, something curious. It's about an altercation that occurred between our two classes the other day, she explained, looking away from the green-haired teen as though ashamed of herself. I am aware that you were present when everything went down, and I am grateful that you were able to keep things from escalating. The fact that all of that happened within my proximity and failed to notice has not sat well with me. To be honest, I had wanted to talk to you in Kindo after school that day, but with all of my new duties, it slipped my attention. Then there was the USJ incident yesterday. I also wanted to apologize for the way my classmates behaved. Izuku gave her a small smile, nodding his head slightly. I was just looking after my classmates. I'm sure that, had you been there, we could have both prevented things from escalating, he said before his smile faded. However, your apology is pretty meaningless. That seemed to shock Yaoyorozu as she took a step back. What do you mean? She asked. Izuku scratched his hair, averting his gaze a bit from the taller girl before replying. Because, look, you weren't there. You weren't the one insulting or belittling our class. Nor were you spoiling for a fight. I get that you're sorry for what happened, but I don't know if they feel the same. As Izuku said this, he thought back to the time before his family moved. He recalled the mother of the bully coming to his family's apartment many times, bowing and apologizing for how her son acted. Izuku even recalled how she placed her hand roughly on the back of her son, forcing him to bow, as well as he fought tooth and nail not to. While it had been a nice gesture, that's all it ever ended up being, a gesture, and an empty one at that since that kid never stopped. In the end, using their newfound money, the Midoriya family decided to just move away. I see, said Yaoyorozu. Izuku then let out a sigh as he turned around. If one of those guys does feel sorry for how they acted, just tell them to swing by 1B. My class, they're a really great group, and if the apology is honest, then it'll be water under the bridge. Now, I have to be getting to class, so dash. Oh, Yaoyorozu stated loudly, startling Izuku once more. The green-haired teen turned around just in time to see the black-haired girl reaching into her bag and pulling out a single piece of paper, which she then handed to Izuku. Sorry, I was asked by Aizawa-sensei to give you this. Izuku gave the girl a curious look before looking down at the paper. At first glance, it seemed to be a document full of the usual, asking for things like name, address, quirk, and so on. Nothing out of the ordinary, yet nothing that would explain what this was for. That is, however, until Izuku looked up at the top of the sheet to see a title in large, bold letters. Class transfer form? What is dash? Aizawa-sensei told me that he believes that you would do better in Class 1A, explained Yaoyorozu, her smile returning. I mean, you'll still be a hero course student, just having a different homeroom and Aizawa's heroic lesson plans. All you have to do is fill that out, and you'll be transferred into our class. Personally, I think that you would dash. Wouldn't that mean that someone in your class would be transferred out? Asked Izuku, cutting off Yaoyorozu. The girl blinked at that. I suppose that would have to happen. Izuku frowned as he looked down at the paper. Honestly, he didn't know what to feel about this. On one hand, the idea that one teacher wanted him in his classroom, reaching out like this was sort of flattering. Yet, at the same time, there was something unsettling about all this. Izuku knew that that hothead that got the highest score in the exam was already in that class. Not to mention, if that loud-mouthed blonde was correct, then the son of the number 2 hero was also there. Did her teacher just want more high-scoring people in his class? Since he hadn't done